during a family vacation. My parents told me to give up my hotel room because my brother needed it more. I smiled and said, "That's nice, but I have a better plan." Their faces dropped when the hotel staff told them the news. I still remember the moment clearly, my mom's shocked face, my dad's confused blinking, and my brother's smug smile disappearing so fast it was almost funny. Almost. But let me explain how it got to this point. Growing up, my younger brother Ryan was the favorite. Actually, he was the only child in my parents' eyes. I was just there, the backup, the babysitter, the one who always had to give up things for him. If Ryan wanted something, he got it. If I wanted something, they'd say, "We'll see," which really meant no. I learned early that life wasn't fair in our house. If I ever complained, I was called selfish or difficult. I got tired of fighting for scraps, so I stopped trying. I planned my escape, and as soon as I turned 18, I left. I worked hard to build a life away from them, no calls, no family holidays, no drama, just peace, until last year. I don't know why, but after years of barely talking to them, I agreed to a family vacation. Maybe I was feeling nostalgic, maybe I thought they'd changed, maybe I was just being dumb. The plan was a week at a fancy beach resort in Maui with my parents, Ryan, his girlfriend, and me. I paid for my own flight and even treated myself to a beautiful private room with an ocean view. It wasn't a regular hotel room, it was a fancy suite with a balcony. Expensive? Yes. Worth it? Absolutely. I was really excited, but that excitement lasted only 4 hours. We arrived and checked in. I was so happy, standing on my balcony, watching the waves. Then there was a knock at my door. It was my mom, wearing her usual fake smile. "Hey, sweetie," she said in her overly sweet voice. "Can we talk for a second?" I should have known what was coming. She stepped inside and closed the door like she was about to drop some big news. "So, Ryan's room isn't as nice as yours," she started carefully, as if I wouldn't see where this was going. "He's having a hard time in there. You know how he gets anxious in small spaces, and his girlfriend is with him, so it's a little cramped." I just stared at her. I was thinking, she continued, "Maybe you could switch rooms with him for the trip. It would mean so much to him." I laughed. "You're joking, right?" Her face got serious. "Don't be like that. He needs the space more than you do. You're alone. You don't need all this." I felt that old, familiar feeling, the expectation that I should give in, be the bigger person, be reasonable, but not this time. I smiled and said, "That's cute, but I have a better plan." She looked confused. "What do you mean?" I grabbed my phone, pulled up my reservation, and showed it to her. "See this? It's my reservation, paid for under my name. That means I decide who stays here, and I choose me." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. "But he's your brother. Family helps each other." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, they do. But you never helped me, ever. So I guess that rule only applied to me, huh?" She started to argue, but I wasn't done. "You and Dad never cared when I struggled. I worked 3 jobs in college. But Ryan? You paid for his tuition, his apartment, his car. I was eating ramen while you sent him on vacations." She looked away, knowing it was true. "You're 30 now," she said, trying to take control. "You should be over this." I laughed. "Over what? The fact that you only call when you need something? That I'm only family when it's convenient for you?" She huffed. "You're being dramatic." "Am I? Let's test that." I opened the door wide and pointed for her to leave. She stared at me like I was crazy. "You're really saying no?" "I'm really saying no." Her face turned angry. "Fine, I'll talk to your father." "Go ahead," I said, smiling, and shut the door in her face. I knew she wasn't done. 15 minutes later, there was another knock. This time, it was my dad. I didn't let him start. "Let me guess," I said. "Mom sent you." "Son, let's be reasonable," he said. I held up my phone. "Want to see the reservation again?" "That's not the point," he said. "Then what is the point?" I asked. "Because it seems like the point is, Ryan wants something. So let's take it from me." He frowned. "He's your brother. You should be willing to." I laughed. "Finish that sentence." "I should be willing to what?" He stayed silent. "That's what I thought," I said. "Now, if you don't mind, I have a vacation to enjoy." I shut the door. I barely had time to sit down before the next knock. This time, it was Ryan, and he was mad. He stood in my doorway, arms crossed, trying to look tough. I'd seen this act before. He used it to get his way when we were kids, but I wasn't a kid anymore. "You're being a real jerk. You know that?" he said, pushing past me like he owned the place. I let him. Let him walk into my suite. Let him see the view. Let him imagine himself staying there for the week. Then I said, "You're in my room. You have 10 seconds to leave before I call hotel security. He laughed. Security? Seriously? This is family, man. I smiled. Yeah? Where was family when I needed help? Where was family when I was eating cheap noodles every night? And mom and dad were sending you money for a new gaming PC? He rolled his eyes. Oh my god, are we still talking about college? Not just college, I said. My whole life. He threw his hands up. This is stupid. You don't even need this room. You're alone. I have a girlfriend. Do you know how uncomfortable our room is? That's not my problem, I said. It could be if you weren't such a selfish jerk. I laughed, really laughed. Ryan's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to me standing up to him. You think I'm selfish? I asked, stepping closer. Let's talk about selfish. Who got a car for their 16th birthday? Silence. Who had their college paid for while I took out loans? More silence. Who got vacations and new clothes while I worked nights at a gas station? His face turned dark. Why do you always bring up old stuff? Because you still act like you're owed everything. But guess what? I don't owe you anything. He clenched his fists but didn't say anything. Finally, he smirked. Fine, keep the room. Just remember, you're going to regret this. I asked the hotel staff to repeat what they said. Yes, he said. Your room was switched to another guest. Your name was moved to a standard room with no balcony. I didn't even need to guess who did it. He hesitated. It was your parents who asked for the change. I was furious. Daniel, the staff member, must have seen how angry I looked because he quickly added, "Don't worry, sir, I haven't made the change yet. It seemed strange, so I wanted to check with you first." I took a deep breath to calm down. Good call, Daniel, very good call. I pulled out my phone and showed him my reservation email. I paid for this room. It's under my name. No one else has the right to change it, not my parents, not my brother, no one. Daniel nodded. Understood. I'll make sure your original reservation stays locked. I sighed in relief. Thank you. He hesitated again. Sir, would you like me to flag your account so no one can make changes without your permission? I smiled. Daniel, that's a great idea. I was still angry when I went to my parents' room. I didn't knock, I just slammed the door open. My dad looked annoyed. What's wrong with you? He snapped. You tell me, I shot back. I just found out you tried to steal my room. He didn't even look guilty. It's not stealing, we just made a change. Ryan's room is small. I cut him off. Stop right there. I paid for my room with my money. You had no right to touch my reservation. My mom appeared behind him, sighing like I was being unreasonable. Why are you making such a big deal? It's just a room. Then why didn't Ryan switch rooms? I asked. She frowned. Because his room is already paid for under our account, and yours was separate. It was easier this way. I laughed. You really think I'm that stupid? This isn't about easier. This is about Ryan getting what he wants, like always. My mom crossed her arms. You're being dramatic. My dad huffed. Fine, keep the room, but don't expect us to pay for anything else this trip. I laughed even harder. Pay for me? You haven't paid for anything for me in years, but sure, go ahead and pretend you're punishing me. Meanwhile, I'll be on my balcony, enjoying my ocean view. I turned and walked away before they could say anything. The next few days were tense. Ryan sulked. His girlfriend gave me dirty looks. My parents acted like I had betrayed them, but I didn't care. I spent my days relaxing on the beach, drinking cocktails, and sleeping in the room I paid for. That's exactly what I wanted, I said calmly. Daniel nodded and made a call. Soon, a security guard took us to a small room with monitors. Let's check the footage from last night, Mr. Alvarez, the manager, said. The guard rewound the video, and there he was, Ryan, entering my room alone, without a key card. Mr. Alvarez paused the video. How did he get in? I frowned. Good question. The guard rewound further, and we saw it. Ryan was let in by a hotel employee, a short guy in a concierge uniform. He swiped a key card and held the door open for Ryan. My stomach sank. Mr. Alvarez cursed. That's Miguel. He's worked here for 2 years and never had complaints before. Miguel looked guilty. He said it was his room, but his brother, he glanced at me, was holding the key card. He even offered me 100 to let him in. I laughed. Wow, Ryan bribing hotel staff. That's a new low, even for you. Ryan rolled his eyes. Oh, come on, you're making a big deal out of nothing. It was just a little money. A little? I snapped. You stole over 600 from me. My dad turned to Ryan. You did what? Ryan clenched his fists. You don't even need it. That was it. I turned to Mr. Alvarez. I want my money back, now. Mr. Alvarez nodded. Miguel, you're suspended. Ryan, if you don't return the money, we'll call the police. Ryan's smug look disappeared. My mom gasped. You wouldn't. Oh, I would, I said, and since this is a fancy resort, they take security very seriously, so unless you want to explain to a judge why you bribed a hotel employee and stole from your brother, I suggest you pay up. Ryan looked at my parents for help. My dad shook his head. You're on your own, kid. My mom's face turned red. She started to speak, but I cut her off. You taught him to be like this, I said coldly. You always let him take from me, but not this time. Silence. Finally, Ryan pulled out his wallet and threw $400 on the table. I didn't touch it. All of it, I said. He clenched his teeth but pulled out another $200 and slammed it down. I smiled, took the money, and stood up. Pleasure doing business with you. Then I turned to Mr. Alvarez. If my family tries to change my reservation again, I want to be notified right away. Understood, he said, and as an apology, we're upgrading you to a VIP package, free spa access, daily room service, and a free sunset cruise. I grinned. Now that's what I like to hear. My parents sat there in silence as I walked out, leaving them to deal with Ryan. The rest of the trip was great. I relaxed while my family sulked in their basic rooms. I got massages, ate lobster, and enjoyed cocktails on a yacht. Ryan avoided me. My parents were cold but didn't push me further. When we flew home, I blocked their numbers. No more second chances. No more being the afterthought. I wasn't their doormat anymore, and it felt amazing. I thought that was the end of it. I had my money, my VIP treatment, and my family was stuck with their mess. But Ryan wasn't done. A week later, I got a notification from my bank. Ryan had reported the money he gave me as fraud. I laughed. He really thought he could steal from me twice. I called the bank, explained everything, and sent them the security footage, screenshots, and the hotel's report. The bank quickly denied his claim. Ryan lost the dispute, and his account was flagged, which ruined his credit score. Since my parents always bailed him out, I wondered how long it would take before he came crawling back for help. Spoiler, not long. A few months later, I got a call from an unknown number. It was my mom, sounding desperate. Listen, honey, we need to talk. Ryan's in trouble. I rolled my eyes. I didn't call back. 2 hours later, my dad called. I answered. Cut to the chase. I said, what does Ryan want? My dad sighed. It's not just him. He messed up, and now it's affecting us too. I smirked. Oh, do tell. Apparently, after the vacation, Ryan kept using his credit cards. But since the bank flagged his account, they froze his cards and denied his loans. He tried to lease a car, denied. Tried to rent an apartment, denied.
The morning sun had barely risen when the shrill ring of the phone shattered the calm of Christmas morning. I groggily reached for the handset, expecting a cheery holiday greeting. Instead, I was greeted by the irate voice of Evelyn, my mother-in-law. Laura, it's an emergency. Evelyn's voice was laced with manufactured panic. What's wrong? I asked, my heart racing with concern. It's my water bill. I pay monthly, but my niece pays quarterly. It's unfair. I need Tom to call the utility company right now. I blinked in disbelief. This was her emergency? I felt a surge of irritation. Evelyn, it's Christmas. The company won't be open today, and it's hardly an emergency. She cut me off. You don't understand. I'm alone here, and no one cares. Her voice rose, teetering on the edge of hysteria. As I tried to reason with her, I heard Tom's footsteps approaching. What's going on? He asked, rubbing sleep from his eyes. It's your mom, I said, passing him the phone. Water bill crisis. Tom's face tightened as he listened to his mother. I could hear her shrill voice through the phone, her words dripping with guilt and urgency. After he hung up, I couldn't hold back my frustration. Why do you let her manipulate you like this, Tom? It's Christmas, and she's talking about water bills. Tom's expression hardened. She's just lonely, Laura. We need to be there for her. But there's a limit, Tom. She's taking advantage of your kindness. Our argument escalated, voices rising in anger and frustration. In the midst of our heated exchange, I noticed an email notification on Tom's phone from his sister, Anne. Curiosity piqued. I opened it and felt my blood run cold. The email was a chain of messages where Evelyn had been spreading vile rumors about me to the family, painting herself as the victim of my supposed neglect. I confronted Tom, my voice shaking with rage. Look at this. She's been lying about me to your family. This is the lonely woman you're defending. Tom read the messages, his face paling. I had no idea, he stammered. The realization hit me like a wave. Evelyn was not just a nagging mother-in-law, she was a manipulator who had been actively working to turn my own husband's family against me. On this Christmas morning, amidst the twinkling lights and unopened gifts, a cold, hard resolve settled in my heart. Evelyn had crossed a line, and it was time for her to face the consequences of her actions. In the cold aftermath of the Christmas confrontation, memories of Evelyn's past intrusions began to surface like unwelcome ghosts. I sat in the living room, the twinkling Christmas lights mocking me with their cheer, as I recalled countless instances where Evelyn had overstepped her bounds. Each memory stoked the fires of my resolve. Later that day, as Tom and I sat in strained silence, I decided to open up about the simmering resentments. Tom, do you remember our anniversary last year? I began, my voice steady but laced with bitterness. How your mother showed up uninvited and made that scene about how I'm not right for you. Tom shifted uncomfortably. I know, Laura, but she's just... Or what about the time she accidentally sent those emails to your colleagues about me being an opportunist? I cut him off. It's always just Evelyn being Evelyn, but it's destructive, Tom. She's tearing us apart. Tom looked down, unable to meet my gaze. I didn't realize how much this affected you, he admitted. The next day, I decided to dig deeper into Evelyn's behavior. I called Anne, Tom's sister, and what she revealed was shocking. Laura, you're not the first, Anne confessed. Mom drove away Tom's ex with similar tactics. I thought she'd changed, but I see the pattern now. My heart sank. This was a deep-seated pattern of behavior, not just simple meddling. Why didn't anyone warn me? I asked, a mix of anger and sadness in my voice. We thought she'd mellowed out, Anne replied. I'm so sorry, Laura. That night, I lay in bed, Tom's steady breathing beside me, a stark contrast to the turmoil in my mind. The revelation of Evelyn's past actions wasn't just hurtful, it was a betrayal of trust. I realized then that exposing Evelyn's manipulative nature was not just for my vindication, but for the sake of the entire family. It was time for Evelyn's web of lies to unravel. I began collecting evidence of her manipulations, emails, messages, and even recorded conversations. Each piece of evidence was a confirmation of her deceit. I was building my case, not for revenge, but for justice. Evelyn's reign of emotional terror had to end, and I was going to be the one to end it. As I worked, a sense of empowerment grew within me. For too long, I had let Evelyn's actions slide, but no more. The day of reckoning was approaching, and I would be ready. As the days rolled on, my mission to expose Evelyn's duplicity became my driving force. The strain between Tom and me grew, a silent undercurrent beneath our daily routines. He knew I was planning something, but the full extent of my intentions remained hidden, like a shadow in the corner of our life. One evening, as I was organizing the evidence I had gathered, Tom approached me, his expression a mix of concern and caution. Laura, what are you doing? He asked, his voice tinged with unease. I'm doing what needs to be done, I replied without looking up, my eyes fixed on the screen displaying years of Evelyn's manipulations. This is going too far. It's becoming an obsession, Tom said, his voice rising in frustration. Can't we just talk to her, try to work this out? I turned to face him, my resolve stealing my voice. Talk to her? After everything she's done? No, Tom. She needs to be held accountable. Tom sighed, the weight of our predicament pressing down on him. I just don't want this to tear us apart. But the wedge Evelyn had driven between us was already too deep, and I knew there was no turning back. The opportunity I was waiting for presented itself a week later. Evelyn called, feigning sweetness, inviting us over for a family dinner. It's time to clear the air, she said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. I accepted her invitation, knowing this was the moment to reveal the truth. The dinner was set in Evelyn's meticulously decorated dining room, the table adorned with fine china and crystal glasses. Family members chattered nervously, sensing the underlying tension. After the main course, as everyone settled, I stood up, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. I have something to say, I announced, my voice steady. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. I locked eyes with Evelyn, who looked back at me with a smirk, confident in her untouchable matriarchal status. But as I began to unveil the evidence of her deceit, her smirk faltered. I recounted every manipulation, every lie, every instance of her cruelty. The family listened in stunned silence, their expressions shifting from disbelief to shock. Evelyn tried to interrupt, to spin her web of lies, but the truth was irrefutable. The mask she had so carefully crafted over the years was finally slipping, revealing the monster beneath. As I spoke, I felt a catharsis, a release of years of pent-up frustration and hurt. This was not just for me, but for every person she had wronged. When I finished, the room was heavy with a deafening silence. Evelyn sat there, exposed and defeated, her usual commanding presence reduced to a mere shadow. The aftermath of the dinner revelation was like the quiet after a storm. Evelyn's once unassailable position in the family was now deeply shaken. The family, once under her spell, began to see her in a new, unflattering light. In the days that followed, I received calls from various family members, each expressing their shock and gratitude. "I had no idea," said Tom's cousin, her voice heavy with disbelief. "She always seemed so sweet to me." Tom, however, was conflicted. He was torn between his loyalty to his mother and his newfound understanding of her true nature. "I just can't believe she would go this far," he said one night, his voice laden with sorrow. "It's hard to see the truth when it's hidden behind a mask," I replied softly, my hand finding his. "But now we know, and we can't unsee it." As the family grappled with the new reality, I felt a mix of triumph and sadness. The victory was bittersweet. Evelyn had been exposed, but at the cost of fracturing the family she had so tightly controlled. Then came a surprising turn. Anne called to tell me that Evelyn wanted to meet me, alone. "She says she wants to apologize," Anne said, skepticism in her tone. I hesitated, but my curiosity got the better of me. I needed to see Evelyn, to understand why she had done what she had. We met at a neutral cafe, a public place where the dynamics of power were different from the familial walls that had once bolstered her authority. Evelyn was already there, sitting rigidly, her usual air of command replaced with something that resembled humility. "Laura, she began, her voice trailing off, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Why did you do it, Evelyn?" I asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. "Why all the lies, the manipulation?" She sighed, a deep, weary sound. "I was afraid," she confessed. "Afraid of losing Tom, afraid of being alone. You were taking him away, and I just couldn't handle that." Her words were like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. The fear, the insecurity, it didn't excuse her actions, but it painted a more complex picture of the woman who had become my nemesis. "I understand fear," I said slowly. "But what you did, Evelyn, it wasn't just fear, it was destructive." "I know," she whispered, her eyes downcast. "And I'm sorry, truly sorry." I looked at her, this woman who had caused so much pain, and realized that holding on to anger would only continue the cycle. "I accept your apology, Evelyn, but things can't go back to how they were." As I left the cafe, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was still ours to shape. And as for Evelyn, her journey to redemption was just beginning, a path she would have to walk alone. In the weeks that followed, the dynamic within Tom's family shifted. The once unquestioned authority Evelyn held was now a subject of scrutiny. Family gatherings, once dominated by her presence, had a new, tentative atmosphere, as if everyone was relearning how to interact without her overbearing influence. Tom and I, meanwhile, found a renewed sense of unity. The ordeal had tested us, but in its wake we discovered a deeper understanding and respect for each other. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner," Tom said to me one evening, his eyes filled with regret. "You were right about my mother." "It's not about being right," I replied, taking his hand. "It's about us and our future. We're in this together, remember?" Evelyn, for her part, had become more withdrawn. The revelation of her actions and the subsequent apology had taken a toll on her, stripping away the facade she had maintained for years. She was no longer the matriarch reigning over her family. She was just a woman, flawed and humbled. But the true test came during the next family event, a birthday party for Tom's nephew. It was the first large gathering since the dinner confrontation. As we arrived, I could feel the eyes of the family on us, a mix of curiosity and apprehension in their gazes. Evelyn was there, noticeably quieter, her usual flamboyance subdued. Throughout the party, I watched her interact with family members, noticing the careful, almost timid way she engaged with them. It was a stark contrast to the domineering woman I had known. Then, unexpectedly, she approached me. "Laura, may I have a word?" she asked, her voice lacking its former certainty. We stepped aside, away from the buzz of the party. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her eyes meeting mine, "for showing me the mirror. I've lost a lot, but I needed to see the truth." Her words took me by surprise. The Evelyn standing before me was a shadow of the woman who had caused so much turmoil. In her place was someone vulnerable, someone seeking redemption. "I hope you find peace, Evelyn," I said, my voice soft but firm. "But remember, trust is earned, not given." As the party continued, I reflected on the journey we had all undertaken. The path to healing was long and uncertain, but there was hope. Evelyn's fall from grace had been her own doing, but in her downfall, there was a chance for change, for her and for all of us. As Tom and I left the party, hand in hand, I realized that while the echoes of the past would always remain, our future was ours to write. And in that future, there was room for growth, understanding, and maybe, just maybe, forgiveness. I pushed open the door to the maternity ward with a sense of anticipation, only to have it crushed under the weight of the scene before me. There, in a room filled with the soft coos of a newborn, was Emily, my childhood friend, and Jack, the man I called my husband. Between them lay the undeniable truth, a baby, their baby. "Anna, you're here." Emily's voice was falsely cheerful. "Meet Ethan, our little miracle." The words hit me like a physical blow, yet I managed to find a smile. "He's beautiful, Emily. Congratulations." Jack stood there, a picture of conflict. "Anna, I can explain," he stammered. I held up my hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "No need, Jack. I think the situation speaks for itself." Emily's eyes gleamed with a mix of victory and spite. "We didn't plan this, Anna. These things just happen." The coldness in my chest spread as I looked at them, my life unraveling in front of my eyes. "Yes, things just happen," I echoed hollowly. Jack's eyes begged for understanding. "Anna, please, let's talk about this." I shook my head, the reality setting in. "There's nothing to discuss, Jack. You've made your choice." Emily butted in, her voice sharp. "It's not like you were starting a family anyway. What with your career and all." I felt a surge of anger, but quickly masked it with a calm exterior. "My career has nothing to do with this betrayal, Emily. You know that." Jack tried to reach out, his face etched with regret. "Anna, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." I stepped back, avoiding his touch. "But you did, Jack. You both did." Turning to leave, I could feel their eyes on my back, heavy with unspoken words and guilt. As I walked out, Emily's voice, laced with fake concern, followed me. "Take care, Anna. We really are sorry." Outside, the hospital's pristine halls felt suffocating. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and dialed a familiar number. "It's me. It happened. The baby, it's Jack's." My voice was steady, belying the chaos within. "I need your help. We need to meet immediately." The call ended, and I was left staring at the sterile walls, my mind racing. This was not just a betrayal, it was a declaration of war, and I was not going to retreat. A week later, I sat across from my old friend, Lisa, at a quiet cafe downtown. Lisa had been my confidant since college, the one person who knew me inside out. "Anna, how are you holding up?" Lisa's concern was evident in her eyes. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice. "I'm managing. It still feels unreal, you know?" Lisa reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "I can only imagine. But why did you want to meet? Is there something you're planning?" A flash of determination crossed my face. "I can't let them get away with this, Lisa. I need to do something." Lisa leaned in, her expression serious. "What are you thinking, Anna?" I hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I want to expose them, make them feel the pain they've caused me." Lisa nodded, understanding my need for retribution. "Do you have a plan?" I outlined my idea, watching as Lisa listened intently. "First, I need to gather evidence. Texts, emails, anything that proves their affair." "Smart move," Lisa commented. "But how will you get this evidence?" "I have access to Jack's laptop. He's careless with passwords, and I know Emily's routine. It won't be difficult to catch her off guard." Lisa's eyes narrowed in thought. "And after you get this evidence?" I felt a cold resolve settle within me. "I'm going to expose them publicly. At the Smith family reunion next month, Jack's entire family will be there." Lisa's eyes widened. "That's bold, Anna. But what about the repercussions?" I met her gaze squarely. I've thought about it. I'm ready for whatever comes next. They need to pay for their betrayal. Lisa sighed, offering a supportive smile. I'm with you, Anna. Whatever you need, I'm here. I felt a surge of gratitude for Lisa's unwavering support. Thank you, Lisa. I'll need your help to pull this off. We spent the next hour strategizing, plotting each step with meticulous care. As I left the cafe, a sense of purpose filled me. Jack and Emily had shattered my world, but I was going to rebuild it on my terms. They would soon learn the cost of their deceit. The evening was chilly as I parked outside Jack's office building, waiting. Tonight was crucial. I needed to access his laptop to find undeniable proof of his betrayal with Emily. As Jack's car finally pulled out of the parking lot, I slipped inside, using the spare key he didn't know I had. My heart pounded as I made my way to his home office, a room once filled with shared dreams and now just a symbol of his deceit. I booted up his laptop, my fingers flying over the keys. Emails, messages, photos, the evidence of their affair unfolded before me. My heart ached, but I pushed the pain aside. This was about justice now. Anna, what are you doing here? I spun around, startled. Jack stood in the doorway, his face a mix of surprise and guilt. I could ask you the same, Jack, working late or just avoiding coming home. My voice was steady, but my insides churned with anger. Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'm sorry, Anna. I know I've hurt you. I scoffed, turning back to the laptop. Sorry doesn't even begin to cover it, Jack. I trusted you. Jack moved closer, his voice softening. Anna, let's talk. We can fix this. I spun around, anger flaring. Fix this? How, Jack? By pretending you didn't betray me with my best friend? Jack flinched at my words, but his expression hardened. It wasn't planned, Anna. It just happened. I laughed bitterly. It just happened. That's your excuse? You destroyed our marriage, Jack. Jack's gaze dropped. I know I made a mistake, but I still love you, Anna. I shook my head in disbelief. Love? Is that what you call this? Sneaking around, lying to my face? Jack reached out, but I stepped back. Don't, Jack. We're beyond that now. My eyes returned to the laptop screen, the evidence glaring back at me. I have what I need now. Proof of your little affair. Jack's eyes widened in panic. Anna, please, think about what you're doing. I met his gaze, my resolve unwavering. I have thought about it, Jack, and I'm just getting started. Leaving Jack standing there, I walked out with the evidence I needed. It was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. The day of the Smith family reunion arrived, a perfect stage for the unveiling of Jack and Emily's deceit. I had meticulously planned every detail, the evidence securely tucked away in my purse. As I entered the grand hall, adorned with family portraits and laughter, I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the moment of truth. Jack spotted me first, his eyes widening in surprise and worry. Anna, you came. I wasn't sure you'd... I cut him off with a cold smile. Miss this? Not for the world, Jack. Emily, seeing me, hesitated before approaching with a forced smile. Anna, it's good to see you. I nodded curtly, my gaze scanning the room. Quite the gathering, isn't it? As dinner commenced, I felt the eyes of Jack's family on me, their whispers barely concealed. I bided my time, waiting for the perfect moment. Finally, as the toast began, I stood, my heart pounding in my chest. May I have your attention, please? The room fell silent, all eyes on me. Jack's face drained of color, a silent plea in his eyes. But it was too late for pleas. I have something to share, I began, my voice steady. About Jack and Emily. A collective gasp filled the room as I pulled out the photos and messages, displaying them for all to see. The evidence of their affair, undeniable and raw. The reactions were immediate and varied. Shock, anger, disappointment. Jack's mother looked like she might faint, while his father's face reddened in fury. Emily tried to interrupt, her voice shrill. Anna, please, this isn't what it looks like. I turned to her, my gaze cold. Isn't it? It looks like betrayal to me. It looks like my husband and my best friend stabbing me in the back. Jack finally found his voice, his tone desperate. Anna, I'm so sorry. Please, let's talk about this. I shook my head, my resolve firm. There's nothing left to say, Jack. You've made your bed, and now you can lie in it. The room erupted into chaos, family members voicing their outrage and disappointment. Jack's father approached me, his expression one of deep regret. Anna, we had no idea. I'm so sorry you had to go through this. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief amidst the turmoil. Thank you, Mr. Smith. I just thought you all deserved to know the truth." As I left the room, the weight of the past months seemed to lift off my shoulders. I had done it, exposed their lies, their betrayal. The path ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope. In the weeks following the family reunion, the fallout from my revelation was more devastating than I had anticipated. Jack's family, once a pillar of support and pride, had shunned him, and Emily was now a pariah, her true character exposed. I sat across from Lisa at the same cafe where we had plotted our strategy, watching the ripple effects unfold. "They're getting what they deserve," I said, a bitter taste in my mouth. Lisa sipped her coffee, her eyes reflecting the gravity of the situation. "How are you holding up, though? This must be hard on you, too." I shrugged, my emotions a complex web. It's a relief, honestly, but it's also empty. I wanted justice, and I got it, but at what cost? Lisa reached over, her touch reassuring. "You stood up for yourself, Anna. Don't ever regret that." News of the scandal had spread like wildfire. Jack had been suspended from his job pending an investigation, and Emily's social circles had turned their backs on her. Their affair, once hidden in shadows, was now in the harsh light of public scrutiny. I learned from mutual friends that Emily had tried to reach out to me, but I had no interest in her apologies. She had made her choice, and now she was living with the consequences. Jack, on the other hand, had become a shell of the man I once knew. He called me repeatedly, leaving voicemails filled with apologies and pleas for forgiveness. But I couldn't find it in me to feel sympathy for him. He had broken the vows we made, the trust we built. One evening I received a call from Jack's mother. Her voice was weary, filled with sadness. "Anna, I just wanted to apologize on behalf of our family. We never knew about Jack's indiscretions. You didn't deserve any of this." Her words were kind, but they did little to soothe the pain. "Thank you, Mrs. Smith. I appreciate your call." As the call ended, I looked out the window, watching the world go by. The streets were busy with life, people moving on, unaffected by the turmoil in my world. I realized then that it was time for me to move on, too. I had gotten my revenge, exposed the lies and deceit, but holding on to the anger and bitterness would only poison me further. I made a decision that day. It was time to close this chapter of my life and start anew. Jack and Emily had chosen their paths, and now I was choosing mine, a path towards healing and hopefully happiness. Several months had passed since I had laid bare the truth about Jack and Emily. The once tumultuous storm of emotions had settled into a calm acceptance. I found myself in a new phase of life, one marked by self-discovery and rebuilding. Lisa and I met again at our usual cafe, a place that had witnessed the unfolding of my revenge, and now my renewal. "You seem different, Anna. Lighter, somehow," Lisa observed, her eyes searching mine. I smiled, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. "I am different, Lisa. The whole ordeal with Jack and Emily, it forced me to reevaluate everything. I've let go of the anger. It was consuming me." Lisa smiled back, visibly relieved. "I'm so glad to hear that. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die." I nodded in agreement. "And I've got news. I've decided to start a new chapter in my life." Lisa leaned in, her curiosity piqued. "Do tell." "I'm moving," I announced. "A new city, a new job, a fresh start." Lisa's smile broadened. "That's wonderful, Anna. You deserve all the happiness in the world." I sipped my coffee, feeling a sense of excitement for the future. "Thank you, Lisa. I'm looking forward to it." "Oh, and there's something else." "What is it?" Lisa asked, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. I hesitated for a moment, the words feeling surreal even to me. "I've met someone. His name is Michael. He's different, kind, understanding. We've been seeing each other for a few weeks now." Lisa's excitement was palpable. "Anna, that's amazing. Tell me everything about him." As I shared details about Michael, I realized how far I had come from the broken woman I was months ago. The pain inflicted by Jack and Emily's betrayal would always be a part of my story, but it no longer defined me. I had taken control of my narrative, turning a painful ending into a hopeful beginning. The sun set outside the cafe, casting a warm glow over the bustling city. Life moved on, relentless and beautiful in its persistence, and so did I, stepping into a future filled with possibilities and the promise of new beginnings. At 31, pregnant and seemingly settled, my life appeared perfect to any outsider. But beneath this veneer, a starkly different reality lurked. Derek, my husband, was a master of public charm. At 38, he was the sort who drew eyes in any gathering. His laugh was infectious, his stories captivating. To the world, we were the idyllic couple, eagerly awaiting our first child. Yet behind the closed doors of our home, Derek's true colors bled through. The affection and warmth he once showered on me had turned into something colder, harsher. His words, once filled with love, now often cut deep. I had become adept at navigating his moods, a silent dance of walking on eggshells. I often found myself reminiscing about our early days, filled with joy and promise. Derek was rock, my confidant, but marriage seemed to unravel him, revealing a controlling and often cruel man. I told myself it was the stress of his job, but deep down, I knew these were mere excuses. The sound of a key in the lock jolted me back to reality. My heart skipped a beat. Derek was home early. Standing up quickly, I adjusted my maternity dress and tried to muster a smile. "Morning, love," Derek greeted, hanging up his coat. His voice was light, but his eyes, cold and scrutinizing, quickly scanned the room. "Good morning," I replied, my voice strained. "I wasn't expecting you so soon." He shrugged nonchalantly and headed for the fridge. "Needed a break from the office. How's the little one doing?" His hand rested on my belly, a gesture that once brought joy, now only discomfort. "He's doing fine," I managed to say. "Good," he said, his gaze lingering on me. "You look tired, Clara. You should rest more." I nodded silently, knowing better than to argue. Lunch passed in an uncomfortable silence. Derek was distant, lost in his own world, while I struggled with my meal. The tension between us was like a third unwelcome guest at the table. Post-lunch, Derek disappeared into his study, leaving me alone with my thoughts. My eyes landed on a family photo on the wall, a painful reminder of the facade we upheld. I felt trapped, a prisoner in my own home. I knew I needed to talk to someone, but who would believe the dark side of Derek, the perfect husband, the successful businessman? I felt utterly alone. As the day wore on, a resolve began to form within me. I couldn't continue living this lie, not for myself and definitely not for my unborn child. I had to find a way out, to expose Derek for who he really was. It was a daunting task, but for the sake of my child, I was ready to do whatever it took. That night, as I lay beside him, I silently vowed to myself I would find the courage to leave, to give my child a life free from this shadow. I needed a plan, a way to reveal Derek's true nature. It was a challenging path, but for my child, I was willing to walk it. I woke up to another day under the same roof as Derek, feeling the weight of my unborn child and the heavier burden of my secret turmoil. The morning was routine. Derek left for work with a peck on the cheek, a gesture so hollow it stung. As the door closed behind him, I allowed myself a moment to breathe, to feel the freedom his absence brought. But this respite was short-lived. Today, I had decided, was the day I would begin to document Derek's true nature. It was risky, but necessary. I needed evidence, something tangible to show the world the man he really was. That evening, as Derek returned, I braced myself. His mood was a barometer for the evening ahead. He came in, his face like a thundercloud. "Evening," I greeted him cautiously. He grunted in response, tossing his keys on the table. "What's for dinner?" I had prepared his favorite, roast chicken with vegetables. I hoped it might lighten his mood. "Roast chicken. It's almost ready." He eyed the kitchen suspiciously, as if expecting a flaw. "Make sure it's not dry this time." I nodded, feeling a knot in my stomach. At dinner, Derek picked at his food, his frown deepening with every bite. "This is bland," he muttered, pushing his plate away. "Can't you do anything right?" I clenched my fists under the table, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "I'm sorry, Derek. I'll try to do better." "You always say that, but I see no improvement." His voice was laced with contempt. I wanted to scream, to tell him how his words crushed me, but I held back. Instead, I quietly cleared the table, feeling his eyes bore into me. Later that night, in the privacy of my room, I took out my phone and began to write everything down. Every harsh word, every dismissive gesture. It felt like opening a floodgate, the words pouring out of me. This diary would be my weapon, a testament to the truth. The next few days were a blur of tension and silent suffering. Derek's mood swung wildly, and I tiptoed around him, capturing every incident in my phone. His disdainful comments, his careless disregard for my well-being, I recorded it all. One evening, as we sat watching TV, Derek suddenly turned to me. Why are you so quiet these days? You used to be more lively. I met his gaze, my heart pounding. Just tired, I guess, he scoffed. You're always tired. What do you even do all day? His words were like a slap in the face, but I swallowed the hurt. Taking care of the house and preparing for the baby, I said quietly. Derek laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. Taking care of the house? Look at this place. You're barely managing. I felt a tear escape my eye, but I quickly wiped it away. This was the Derek that the world needed to see, the one hidden behind closed doors, and I was going to expose him. Each day blurred into the next, a monotonous cycle of dread and resilience. Derek's behavior worsened, his mask slipping more frequently. I continued to document every cruel word, every cold gesture, building my case against him in secret. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Thursday, mundane in every way, until Derek stormed home early from work, his face twisted in fury. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "The incompetence at work is driving me insane," he yelled, slamming his briefcase on the table. "Can't anyone do their job right?" I stepped back, feeling the walls of the room closing in. "Derek, please, you're scaring me." "Scaring you?" He scoffed. "I'm not even doing anything yet." His words sent a chill down my spine. I knew I had to be careful, to not provoke him further. But it was like walking through a minefield, blindfolded. As I tried to calm him, suggesting he relax and take a break, Derek's rage only grew. He began to hurl insults, each word a dagger aimed at my heart. I retreated to the kitchen, hoping to put some distance between us, but he followed, his anger a palpable force. "You're useless, Clara. Can't cook, can't clean. What good are you?" I stood there, my back against the counter, feeling trapped. My hand found a pair of scissors lying there, a mundane household tool, yet in that moment a lifeline. As Derek advanced, I held the scissors up defensively. "Stay back, Derek, please." The look in his eyes changed then, a flicker of surprise, maybe even fear. He stopped, his rage replaced by something else. Realization, perhaps. He knew he had gone too far. "What are you going to do, Clara? Stab me?" His voice was a venomous hiss. "No," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "but I won't let you hurt me." We stood there in a standoff, the tension thick in the air. Then Derek laughed, a cold, mocking sound. "You're pathetic," he said, turning away. "Don't think this changes anything." But it had changed something. It had shown me the depth of his cruelty and my own strength. I knew then that I had to act, to bring his true nature to light. That night, after Derek had gone to bed, I sent an email to his boss, attaching excerpts from my diary. I detailed the abuse, the fear, the reality of living with Derek. It was a risk, exposing him like this, but I had reached my breaking point. The next morning, Derek left for work as usual, unaware of the storm that was brewing. I waited, my heart pounding, for the inevitable fallout. It came in the form of a phone call from Derek's boss. He was shocked, apologetic. He had no idea, he said. He promised to handle the situation. Later that day, Derek came home, his expression one of defeat. He had been suspended from work, pending an investigation. The mask he wore so well had slipped, revealing the monster beneath to the world. As I looked at him, I felt a mix of emotions, fear, relief, a sense of justice. This was just the beginning, I knew. There would be more battles to fight, more truths to uncover. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. "I know what you did, Clara," Derek said, his voice low. "Yes," I replied, meeting his gaze, "and I'd do it again." The aftermath of my email was like a storm breaking. Derek was a shadow of his former self, his arrogance replaced by a sullen, brooding demeanor. But I knew better than to let my guard down. In the silence of our home, his resentment simmered like a cauldron on the verge of boiling over. Uncle Jack, my late father's brother and the only family I had left, was the first person I reached out to. He had always been a pillar of strength, and I knew I could trust him with the truth. "Clara, I always suspected something was off," Uncle Jack said over the phone, his voice heavy with concern. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" His words were kind, but they stung. I had been too ashamed, too afraid of not being believed. But now I needed him. "I need your help, Uncle Jack. I can't do this alone." "We'll get you out of this, Clara. You're not alone anymore," he assured me, and I felt a glimmer of hope. In the following days, I focused on my plan. I continued to document Derek's behavior, each entry more damning than the last. I also started reaching out to a few close friends, testing the waters, gauging their reactions. Some were skeptical, but most were supportive, shocked by the revelation. One evening, as Derek and I sat in an oppressive silence, he finally spoke. "You've ruined my career, Clara. How could you?" His words were icy, but I detected a hint of desperation beneath them. "I didn't ruin anything, Derek. You did that all by yourself," I replied calmly. He glared at me, his hands clenched into fists. "You think you're smart, don't you? Exposing me, turning everyone against me." I met his gaze steadily. "I'm not turning anyone against you. I'm just revealing the truth." Derek laughed bitterly. "And what about you, Clara? Aren't you afraid of what people will say? The perfect wife, not so perfect after all." I felt a surge of anger, but kept my voice even. "I don't care what people say. I won't be a victim anymore." The days that followed were a tense cat-and-mouse game. Derek's moods were unpredictable, and I found myself constantly on edge, but I was determined to see my plan through. Uncle Jack was a constant support, calling daily, offering advice and encouragement. He also started gathering legal resources, preparing for the inevitable divorce proceedings. I knew the hardest part was still to come. Exposing Derek at his workplace was one thing, but the public humiliation and legal battles that lay ahead would be a true test of my resolve. But I was ready. For my sake, and for the sake of my unborn child, I was ready to fight. As I lay in bed each night, I thought about the future. A life free from Derek's shadow, a fresh start for me and my child. It was a future worth fighting for, and I was determined to make it a reality. The days leading up to the confrontation felt like a countdown to Judgment Day. Each passing hour was laced with a mix of dread and determination. Derek, now aware of his precarious situation, oscillated between sullen silence and fits of rage. Uncle Jack had been instrumental in orchestrating the next phase of my plan. He had discreetly contacted some influential people, laying the groundwork for what was to come. "We need to be strategic, Clara," he had advised. "We strike hard and fast, leaving no room for Derek to manipulate the situation." The day of reckoning arrived unceremoniously. Derek left for work, his expression grim. I knew today would be the day he would face the consequences of his actions. I spent the morning in a restless state, my mind racing with possible scenarios. Then the phone call came. It was Uncle Jack, his voice tense but determined. "It's happening, Clara. Derek's being confronted at work. They're going to suspend him pending a full investigation." A wave of relief and apprehension washed over me. "What about the evidence?" "We've got it covered. Everything you documented, the testimonies from his colleagues who witnessed his outbursts, it's all been presented." I hung up the phone, my hands trembling. This was it, the beginning of the end for Derek's reign of terror. Hours later, Derek returned home. The door slammed shut with a force that made me jump. His face was a mask of fury, his eyes burning with unspoken threats. "You," he spat, pointing a finger at me. "You've destroyed me, Clara." I stood my ground, despite the fear coursing through me. "No, Derek, you did this to yourself." He advanced towards me, but I didn't flinch. "You think you've won, don't you? You think you can just ruin my life and walk away?" "It's not about winning, Derek. It's about the truth. About not letting you hurt me or anyone else anymore." He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You're nothing without me, Clara. You'll see. You'll come crawling back." But I knew I wouldn't. I had seen the depth of his cruelty, and I was done being his victim. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal meetings and preparations. Uncle Jack was by my side, guiding me through the process. The divorce proceedings were set in motion, and with each passing day I felt a little more of my old self return. The final hearing was a catharsis. As I stood before the judge, recounting the years of abuse, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Derek sat there, his usual confident demeanor shattered, unable to refute the mountain of evidence against him. When the judge granted the divorce, ruling in my favor, I allowed myself a small smile. It wasn't a victory, but it was justice. Derek had lost his job, his reputation, and now his marriage. The fall of his tyranny was complete. As I walked out of the courtroom, a free woman, I knew the road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. I had stood up to Derek, exposed him for who he truly was, and I had survived. I was ready to start anew, to build a better life for myself and my child, a life free from fear, free from Derek. The seeds of retribution had been sown, and they had borne fruit. The courtroom doors closed behind me, sealing away a chapter of my life that had been marked by fear and subjugation. As I stepped into the sunlight, I felt its warmth as a symbol of the new beginning that lay ahead. Uncle Jack, ever my steadfast supporter, was waiting for me outside. "You did it, Clara," he said, his eyes glistening with unspoken pride. "I did," I replied, the reality of my newfound freedom slowly sinking in. "But I couldn't have done it without you." "We're family," he said, wrapping me in a comforting embrace. "Now let's focus on the future." The days that followed were a blend of relief and rebuilding. The divorce had granted me a significant portion of our shared assets, and Derek was ordered to pay alimony. It was more than just financial security. It was a means to start anew, to provide for my child without the shadow of Derek looming over us. I found a small, cozy apartment in a friendly neighborhood. It was the perfect place to turn into a home, a sanctuary for me and my baby. As I set up the nursery, I felt a surge of excitement, a joy that had been absent for far too long. Uncle Jack was a frequent visitor, helping with the preparations and sharing in my newfound happiness. "You're going to be a great mother," he would say, and I started to believe it. One evening, as I was unpacking a box of books, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Derek. My heart skipped a beat as I read his words. "You'll regret this. You've not seen the last of me." I stared at the screen, feeling a surge of anger mixed with a pang of fear. But then something within me shifted. I was no longer the scared, submissive woman Derek had known. I was stronger now, emboldened by my struggles and triumphs. I typed a reply, my fingers steady. "You no longer have any power over me, Derek. It's over." Sending the message felt like shedding the last remnant of my old life. Derek had lost his grip on me, and I knew that any threats he made were the last gasps of a defeated man. The next few months passed in a blur of anticipation and preparation. The community around me was supportive, and I made new friends, fellow mothers who shared in my excitement and offered their wisdom. Then the day arrived. The birth of my child, a beautiful baby girl, was the culmination of all my hopes and dreams. Holding her in my arms, I felt an overwhelming sense of love and protection. As I looked into her eyes, I made a silent promise. I would give her the life she deserved, full of love, happiness, and freedom. A life so starkly different from the one I had endured. In the end, the dawn of liberation was not just about freeing myself from Derek. It was about breaking the cycle, about building a future where my daughter could thrive, unburdened by the shadows of the past. And in that future, I saw not just survival, but the promise of joy and the endless possibilities that lay ahead. Life with my daughter, Lily, brought a sense of fulfillment I had never known. Each day with her was a gift, a reminder of the new path I had forged for us. She was my little beacon of hope, her laughter and bright eyes a constant source of joy. Uncle Jack was a regular presence in our lives, doting on Lily as if she were his own granddaughter. "She's going to grow up strong, just like her mother," he would say with a twinkle in his eye. As for Derek, he became a distant memory, a dark chapter in my life that had been firmly closed. The last I heard, he had moved away, his reputation tarnished beyond repair. The community that once admired him now knew the truth, and he had lost the respect he so dearly valued. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I would reflect on my journey. The pain and suffering I had endured at Derek's hands had been a crucible, forging me into a stronger, more resilient woman. I had faced my fears, stood up to my oppressor, and come out victorious. But my story was more than just a tale of survival. It was a testament to the power of hope and the strength of the human spirit. It was a message to anyone suffering in silence, afraid and alone, that change was possible, that they too could break free and reclaim their lives. One evening, as I put Lily to bed, I looked down at her peaceful face and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I had fought for this, for her right to grow up in a world free of fear and full of love. As I left her room, the soft glow of the nightlight casting a gentle aura around her, I paused at the doorway. The future was unwritten, a canvas waiting to be painted with the colors of our lives. There would be challenges, no doubt, but I was ready to face them head-on. With Lily by my side and the support of Uncle Jack and my new friends, I felt unstoppable. The scars of the past would always be a part of me, but they no longer defined me. I was Clara, a survivor, a mother, a woman reborn. As I sat down in the living room, a sense of peace settled over me. The struggles I had faced had led me to this moment, to a life filled with promise and possibility. Tomorrow was a new day, and it was ours to embrace. And in that promise of tomorrow I found not just an end, but a beautiful beginning. The day Richard threw the crumpled divorce papers at my feet is etched in my memory like a scar. I remember standing there, frozen, as he said those chilling words, "I've sold the house because I'm moving in with her. It's over, Anna." I was 34 then, a devoted homemaker to our son Jason, who was barely 13. Our life as I knew it shattered in that single moment. I was blindsided, naive, and utterly unprepared for what was to come. Richard and I met when I was just 19. He was 26, a charming man working at a pharmaceutical company's main office. I was a fresh high school graduate, working as a receptionist at one of its subsidiaries. His attention flattered me. I was young, inexperienced, and he seemed like a dream come true. Our whirlwind romance led to an unplanned pregnancy, and before I knew it, we were married in a modest ceremony. Life then was simple, or so I thought. I devoted myself to our home and to Jason. Richard was often busy, his presence in the house dwindling over the years. I didn't question it. I was too caught up in the day-to-day of raising our son and managing our home. The day he left, everything crumbled. I was forced to confront the reality that had been lurking beneath the surface of our seemingly happy life. Richard's infidelity, his growing distance, the signs were all there, but I had chosen to ignore them. With nowhere else to go, Jason and I moved back to my family home. My sister Laura and her husband were not exactly welcoming. Their cold stares and hushed conversations made it clear that we were burdens, intruders in their settled life. I felt lost. A high school graduate with no significant work experience suddenly tasked with finding a job to support myself and my son. The job market was intimidating, each rejection a blow to my already fragile state. But I had Jason to think about, a young boy thrust into a world of adult problems. It was during this time of desperation that I found a job at a call center. It was far from ideal, but it was a start, a glimmer of hope in the darkness that had enveloped my life. The job was challenging, long hours, irate customers, and a constant buzz of activity. But it gave me a sense of purpose, something I had lost in the chaos of my personal life. As I navigated the complexities of the corporate world, I realized how sheltered I had been. My lack of knowledge, particularly about legal matters like divorce and alimony, had left me vulnerable, at the mercy of Richard's whims. This realization fueled a fire within me. I vowed to never let myself be so helpless again. I immersed myself in learning, in understanding the world beyond the confines of home and family. As Jason grew, I saw the impact of our situation on him. He was quiet, more reserved than his peers, his eyes often holding a depth that was too mature for his age. But he was resilient, adapting to our new life with a strength that I admired. Our journey was just beginning, a path filled with struggles and revelations. But in those struggles, I found a strength I never knew I had. And in those revelations, a determination to fight back, to claim what was rightfully ours. Life at my sister Laura's house was a daily reminder of how far we had fallen. Her husband Mark barely concealed his disdain, often remarking, "Anna, you need to find your own place soon. We can't support you forever." The pressure was relentless. I scoured job listings daily, each rejection deepening the sense of despair. But it was Jason's quiet resilience that kept me going. Despite the turmoil, he focused on his studies, his determination unwavering. One day, I stumbled upon a job opening at a customer service center. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a chance. The interview was nerve-wracking. I sat there, feeling out of place in my outdated suit, my resume embarrassingly thin. "Why do you want this job?" the interviewer asked. I wanted to say, "I have no choice." But instead, I mustered a smile and said, "I'm looking for an opportunity to learn and grow." To my surprise, they offered me the job. It was a contract position, but it was a start. I remember the mixed emotions I felt telling Laura and Mark. Relief, but also a stinging sense of inadequacy, as Mark said, "Finally you can start contributing." The job was challenging. The fast-paced environment, the endless calls, it was overwhelming. But I persevered, driven by the need to provide for Jason and to prove to myself that I could stand on my own. As I settled into the routine, I couldn't help but reflect on my marriage with Richard. How had I been so blind? The late nights, the unexplained absences, the whispered phone calls. I had brushed them off, believing in the illusion of a happy family. But the truth was, Richard had been living a double life, and I was just a convenient facade. This realization was a bitter pill to swallow. It fueled a growing anger within me, an anger towards Richard for his betrayal and towards myself for my naivety. But it was a conversation with a coworker that truly opened my eyes. She was a single mother, like me, but much more informed. As we talked about our experiences, she said something that struck a chord. "Anna, did you get any alimony or child support? You know you're entitled to it, right?" I was stunned. The thought had never crossed my mind. Richard had left us with nothing, and I had just accepted it. I realized then how much I didn't know, how unprepared I was for the real world. Determined to make things right, I began to educate myself. I read books, searched online, anything I could find on divorce and family law. The more I learned, the more I understood the extent of Richard's manipulation. And then one day, I received a call from Jason's school. He had been in a fight. My heart sank as I rushed to the school, fearing the worst. But what I found was not a troubled child, but a young man pushed to his limits. "He called you a gold digger," Jason said, his eyes fiery with anger. "He said you were after Dad's money. I couldn't let him say that about you." I was speechless. The pain and humiliation of our situation had reached my son, poisoning his world. It was a wake-up call. I couldn't let Richard's betrayal define us any longer. That night, as I watched Jason sleep, I made a vow. I would fight back. I would reclaim what Richard had taken from us, not just for my sake, but for Jason's. It was time for Richard to face the consequences of his actions. The small apartment we eventually moved into was a far cry from the home we once shared with Richard, but it was ours. The walls were bare, the furniture minimal, but it represented a fresh start. Jason adapted quickly, his resilience continually surprising me. He threw himself into his studies with a fervor that was both impressive and concerning. "I want to do well, Mom, for us," he would say, his determination shining through his words. I had been working at the call center for a year now. The job was still demanding, but I had grown more confident, more adept at handling the challenges. The sense of achievement was small, but it was there, a constant reminder that I was more than Richard's discarded wife. One evening, as Jason and I were having dinner, he looked up from his plate and said, "Mom, do you ever think about Dad?" The question caught me off guard. Richard was a subject we rarely touched upon. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not in the way you might think. I think about what he did to us, how he left us with nothing." Jason's eyes darkened. "I hate him for what he did. He thinks he can just walk away without any consequences." His words struck a chord in me. The anger, the sense of injustice that had been simmering within me, found resonance in Jason's words. "You're right," I said, my voice steady. "He shouldn't get away with it." Over the next few weeks, I began to research more about divorce and family law. I learned about alimony, child support, and the legal avenues available for redress. The more I learned, the more empowered I felt. Then a breakthrough came. I discovered that in cases of infidelity, the betrayed spouse could file for alimony even years after the divorce, under certain conditions. This information was a revelation. Richard had cheated, and I had proof. The late-night calls, the secretive behavior, it all added up. Emboldened by this discovery, I approached a lawyer. She was sympathetic, her eyes reflecting an understanding that went beyond professional courtesy. "You have a case," she said, "but it won't be easy. Are you ready for this?" I nodded, my resolve firm. "I'm ready, for myself and for Jason." The lawyer laid out a plan. We would file for alimony, citing Richard's infidelity and his failure to provide financial support after the divorce. The process would be long and possibly contentious, but I was prepared. I had to be. Jason was supportive, his quiet strength a constant source of comfort. "We'll get through this, Mom," he assured me. "We're in this together." The day we filed the lawsuit, I felt a mix of emotions. Fear, anxiety, but above all, a sense of righteousness. Richard had wronged us, and it was time for him to answer for his actions. As the legal proceedings began, I braced myself for the backlash. Richard was not going to take this lying down, but I was no longer the naive young woman he had left behind. I was stronger, wiser, and I was ready to fight. The legal battle against Richard was like opening a Pandora's box. The lawyer's investigation unearthed more than just infidelity. It revealed a web of lies and deceit that Richard had woven over the years. As we sat in the lawyer's office one afternoon, she presented us with a file. "This is more than I expected," she said, her tone serious. "Richard wasn't just unfaithful, he was living a double life." The documents in the file painted a damning picture. Bank statements, credit card bills, and photos, evidence of Richard's secret life, a life filled with luxury and indulgence, all while neglecting his family. "Look at this," the lawyer pointed to a photograph. It was Richard, looking carefree and happy, with a woman who was not me, his arm wrapped around her. My heart clenched at the sight, but I steeled myself. This was the truth, the reality I had to face. Jason's face hardened as he looked at the evidence. How could he do this? To us, to you. His voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. "We'll make him pay for this," I said, my voice firm. "He can't get away with it." The lawsuit took a toll on us. Richard's lawyers were aggressive, trying to discredit me, paint me as a vindictive ex-wife. But I stood my ground, bolstered by the evidence and the support of Jason and our lawyer. Then came the day of the deposition. Richard sat across from us, his demeanor smug and confident. But that confidence waned as the lawyer began to present the evidence. "Mr. Richard, can you explain these expenses?" she asked, her tone accusatory as she slid the bank statements across the table. Richard's eyes flicked over the documents, and I saw a flicker of panic. "These are personal expenses. They have nothing to do with my marriage." "And these photos," the lawyer continued, her gaze unwavering, "they tell a different story." Richard's facade began to crack. He fumbled for words, his composure slipping. It was nothing serious, just a fling." "A fling?" Jason interjected, his voice icy. "You destroyed our family for a fling?" The room was thick with tension. Richard's lawyer tried to intervene, but the damage was done. The evidence was overwhelming, Richard's excuses feeble and unconvincing. As we left the deposition, I felt a sense of vindication. Richard had been exposed for what he truly was, a cheat. But it was not over yet. The lawsuit would continue, and I knew Richard would fight back. But I was ready. For the first time I felt in control, no longer a victim of Richard's betrayal. I was fighting back not just for myself but for Jason, for the life we deserved. The lawsuit against Richard was dragging on, each hearing more contentious than the last. But amid this turmoil, a surprising development unfolded. One evening, Jason came home, a peculiar look on his face. "Mom, you won't believe what happened today," he said, a mix of amusement and disbelief in his voice. "What happened?" I asked, curious. "I had a job interview today at a pharmaceutical company. Guess who the HR manager is?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "Not Richard?" Jason nodded. "Yes, Richard. He didn't recognize me at first. I guessed he'd forget his own son's face." The irony was bitter. Richard, who had discarded his family for his career, was now unknowingly interviewing his own son. "What did you do?" I asked, a part of me anxious about the encounter. Jason's eyes gleamed with a cold fire. "I played along at first, but then the end. I couldn't resist. I asked him if the company condones affairs. The look on his face was priceless when he realized who I was. I was torn between shock and a sense of poetic justice. Richard, confronted by the son he had abandoned in a setting where he had always felt most powerful. "What did he say?" I pressed, my heart racing. "He denied it, of course. So I pushed further. I asked how he could sit there interviewing me when he destroyed our family for his own selfish desires." Jason's voice was bitter, but there was a sharp sense of triumph, too. He was speechless. I left him there, stewing in his guilt. The revelation was staggering. Richard, now faced with the consequences of his actions in the most unexpected way. It was a twist of fate that seemed almost too fitting. "But why did you go to that interview?" I asked, still trying to wrap my head around the situation. Jason's response was simple, yet profound. I needed to see him, face to face, to show him that despite everything, he didn't break us. We're still here, and we're fighting back. The aftermath of Jason's encounter with Richard at the job interview sent ripples through our ongoing legal battle. Richard, now aware that his own son stood against him, became increasingly desperate in his defense. Our lawyer, Miss Carter, called us for a strategy meeting. "Richard's lawyers are pushing for a settlement," she informed us as we sat in her office. But given the evidence in Jason's testimony, I think we can push for more. What do you want to do? I looked at Jason, seeking his opinion. His jaw was set, his determination clear. We go all the way, he said firmly. He needs to be held accountable, not just financially, but morally too. Miss Carter nodded, her expression resolute. Good. Then let's prepare for the next hearing. It's going to be a tough one, but we have the truth on our side. The hearing was indeed challenging. Richard's lawyer tried to paint a picture of a remorseful man who had simply made a mistake. But Miss Carter was relentless, presenting evidence of Richard's deceit and his neglect of his family responsibilities. Richard himself took the stand, his demeanor a mix of defiance and feigned contrition. I regret the pain I caused my family, he said, his voice lacking genuine remorse. But I believe the settlement offered is fair and just. His words rang hollow, and I felt a surge of anger. How could he stand there playing the victim after all he had done? It was then that Jason spoke up. Fair and just? He challenged, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Was it fair to abandon your family? To lie and cheat while we struggled to make ends meet? The courtroom fell silent, the weight of Jason's words hanging in the air. Richard looked at his son, a flicker of something, guilt perhaps crossing his face. But it was too late for regrets. The judge, after deliberation, ruled in our favor. The settlement was significantly more than what Richard had offered, a tangible acknowledgement of the harm he had caused. As we left the courthouse, a sense of vindication filled me. It wasn't just about the money, it was about justice, about holding Richard accountable for his actions. We did it, Mom, Jason said, a hint of a smile on his lips. We finally made him pay. The legal victory over Richard was more than just a win in court. It was a reclaiming of our dignity and a step towards healing. But the story didn't end there. The consequences of Richard's actions started to unravel his life, both professionally and personally. One evening, a few weeks after the trial, I received a call from an old acquaintance who worked at the same pharmaceutical company as Richard. "Anna, have you heard about Richard?" she asked, her voice tinged with a mix of shock and gossip. "No. What happened?" I inquired, a sense of curiosity mixed with apprehension. "He's been demoted," she revealed. "After your lawsuit, the company did their own investigation. Turns out he was using company resources for his personal affairs. They've transferred him to a remote factory, practically a career death sentence." I sat in stunned silence. Richard, once the rising star of his company, now faced the repercussions of his actions in the most fitting way. His career, the one thing he had valued over us, was crumbling. Jason listened quietly as I shared the news. "Good," he said simply, but his eyes reflected a deeper sense of satisfaction. He's getting what he deserves. But the retribution didn't stop there. Richard's social circle, once a tight-knit group of colleagues and friends, started to distance themselves. His reputation, tarnished by the lawsuit and the company investigation, became a liability. I heard from various sources about Richard's fall from grace, how he had to sell his apartment to cover the settlement and legal fees, how his second wife, the woman he left us for, struggled to adjust to their new, diminished lifestyle. It was a harsh reality, but one that Richard had brought upon himself. His choices, driven by selfishness and deceit, had led to his undoing. As I reflected on these developments, I realized that this was not just about revenge. It was about justice, about the universe righting a wrong. Richard, who had once seemed untouchable, was now facing the consequences of his actions. Jason and I talked about it one evening, the discussion more reflective than vengeful. "Do you feel sorry for him?" Jason asked, his voice neutral. I paused, considering the question. "No," I finally said, "but I do feel a sense of closure. It's as if a chapter has finally ended, allowing us to start anew." Jason nodded in agreement. "Yeah, it's time to move on, to focus on our lives." The chapter closes with Anna and Jason looking towards the future, the weight of the past slowly lifting from their shoulders. They had faced adversity and emerged stronger, ready to embrace the next chapter of their lives. With the legal battle behind us, and Richard facing the consequences of his actions, a new sense of freedom enveloped our lives. It was as if we had been released from a dark cloud that had loomed over us for years. Our small apartment, once a symbol of our struggle, began to feel more like home. We redecorated, making it a reflection of our new beginning. The The walls, once bare, were now adorned with artwork, and the shelves filled with books and memories. Jason, now more relaxed and focused, was excelling in his studies. His previous resolve, born out of anger and a desire for justice, had transformed into a genuine passion for learning. "I'm thinking of applying for a research internship this summer," he told me one evening, his eyes alight with excitement. "That's wonderful, Jason," I said, feeling a surge of pride. "You've worked so hard for this." Our conversations had shifted from the past to the future, from what we had endured to what we hoped to achieve. We talked about travel, about the places we wanted to see, and the experiences we wanted to have. One day, as we sat sipping coffee in our newly decorated living room, I brought up a topic that had been on my mind. "Jason, have you thought about dating? Meeting someone special?" He chuckled, a bit embarrassed. "I've been so focused on school and everything else. But yeah, I think I'm ready to start dating." I smiled, happy to see him considering a normal, happy aspect of life. After everything we had been through, it felt like a victory in itself. As for me, I had grown in my role at the call center, taking on more responsibilities and even mentoring new employees. The job that had once been a necessity had become a source of fulfillment. One evening, as we were having dinner, Jason looked up from his plate and said, "Mom, I've been thinking. We should invite Grandma to come and live with us. She's been alone since Grandpa passed, and I think she'd like it here." The suggestion warmed my heart. "I think that's a great idea, Jason. She's always been there for us. It would be nice to have her close." Our lives had taken a turn towards peace and contentment. With Grandma now living with us, our home felt fuller, brimming with laughter and stories from the past. Her presence brought a sense of completeness, a connection to our roots that we had long missed. One evening, as we sat together, Grandma shared stories of her youth, of the challenges she had faced and overcome. "Life is a tapestry of experiences," she said, her eyes reflecting the wisdom of her years. "Some parts are dark and difficult, while others are bright and joyful, but together they make a beautiful picture." Her words resonated with me. Our journey had been tumultuous, marked by pain and struggle, but it had also been a journey of growth and resilience. We had emerged from the darkness, not unscathed, but stronger and wiser. Jason, now more confident and driven, had become an embodiment of that resilience. His academic pursuits were flourishing, and he had even started dating someone he met at university. Seeing him so happy and fulfilled filled me with an indescribable joy. As for me, I had found a sense of purpose beyond the call center. I started volunteering at a local community center, helping other women who had faced similar challenges. Sharing my story and lending a listening ear brought a sense of fulfillment that I had never known before. One night, as Jason and I sat on our balcony, looking up at the stars, a sense of calm enveloped us. "Mom, do you ever think about Dad anymore?" he asked, his voice gentle. I paused, considering the question. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not in anger or resentment. I think about how far we've come since then, how he was a part of our story but not the defining part." Jason nodded in understanding. "Yeah, I feel the same. He's just a chapter in our past." We sat in silence for a moment, each lost in our thoughts. The journey we had been on was not one we had chosen, but it was one that had shaped us in ways we could never have imagined. Leaving work early, I couldn't shake off a nagging feeling of dread. As I, Laura Bennett, a 28-year-old part-time marketing assistant, approached my home, the unease grew. My mind was racing, but I brushed off the anxiety as a side effect of not feeling well. Little did I know that my world was about to be turned upside down. Stepping into the silent house, I felt the atmosphere shift. The home I shared with my husband Daniel felt unfamiliar, almost hostile. Driven by an inexplicable instinct, I found myself tiptoeing towards the back room where muffled voices broke the eerie silence. My heart pounded against my chest, a sense of impending doom taking hold. I hesitated at the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the knob. The voices became clearer, a man and a woman, intimately engaged in conversation. Pushing the door open just a crack, I peered inside. The sight that greeted me was like a punch to the gut. Daniel, my husband of 3 years, was entwined with a younger woman. Their laughter and affectionate whispers were a stark contrast to the coldness and distance that had crept into our marriage. I stood there, frozen, as Daniel's words sliced through the last threads of trust I had clung to. "Marrying Laura was a mistake," he said, his voice laced with contempt. "Young and beautiful is what I deserve. Isabel, you make me feel alive." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I fought them back. This was not the time for weakness. I needed to be strong, to think clearly. Quietly, I closed the door and retreated, my mind racing with the betrayal I had just witnessed. It wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the realization that the man I loved saw me as nothing more than a mistake. As I made my way to the living room, a plan began to take shape in my mind. I needed evidence, something concrete to expose them for what they were. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. No, who was I kidding? It was about both. I knew I had to be careful, to play my cards right. Daniel was a lawyer, cunning and persuasive. I couldn't confront him without solid proof, so I decided to gather evidence of his infidelity. It was time for me to step out of the shadows and take control of my life. In the days that followed, I became a silent observer in my own home, collecting pieces of their betrayal. Text messages, late-night calls, the subtle changes in Daniel's behavior, everything was a clue, a piece of the puzzle I was putting together. I was no longer the trusting, naive wife. I was a woman on a mission, a woman wronged, ready to strike back. As I lay in bed each night, planning my next move, I realized this was more than just about exposing Daniel and Isabel. This was about reclaiming my life, my dignity. I was ready to face the storm. I had to be. When Daniel and I first met, it felt like a scene out of a romantic movie. He was a charismatic lawyer, and I, a marketing assistant, found myself drawn to his confidence and charm. Our courtship was a whirlwind, filled with laughter, deep conversations, and promises of a future together. We married within a year, a decision that seemed right at the time, but now felt like a hasty mistake. Our married life began like a dream. Daniel was attentive, caring, and seemed genuinely interested in my life, but as the months passed, the facade began to crumble. He became more absorbed in his work, often returning late, and our conversations dwindled to mundane exchanges. One evening, as we sat in silence over dinner, I attempted to bridge the growing gap between us. "Daniel, we barely talk anymore. Is everything okay at work?" I asked, reaching for his hand. He withdrew his hand and replied coldly, "Work is fine, Laura. I'm just tired. You wouldn't understand the pressure I'm under." His words stung, creating a rift that only grew with time. As Daniel's detachment increased, so did my workload at home and the office. I tried to compensate for his absence by keeping the house perfect and excelling at my job, hoping it would bring back the man I fell in love with. Then came the day that marked the beginning of the end. Daniel, in a rare moment of candor, shared his thoughts on our marriage. "Laura, you know I love you, but I feel like you're not pulling your weight financially. I'm carrying the burden of our expenses, and it's not fair." His words felt like a slap. I had been contributing as much as I could from my part-time job, cutting back on personal expenses to support our household. "But Daniel, I've been trying my best. I'm already stretched thin between work and home," I protested. Daniel scoffed, "Your best isn't good enough. Maybe if you worked harder or got a better job, we wouldn't be in this situation." His dismissive attitude left me reeling. I thought of the late nights, the unending household chores, and the sacrifices I had made for our marriage. It was clear that my efforts and my love were not enough for him. That night, I lay awake, contemplating our relationship. The man I married, the man I thought would be my partner in life, had become a stranger. His words echoed in my head, a constant reminder of the growing void between us. The seeds of doubt and resentment took root, setting the stage for the inevitable confrontation that would change everything. The days following that conversation felt like walking through a minefield. Daniel's indifference towards me grew, and with it my sense of isolation. I started to dread his return home each evening, not knowing which version of him I'd face, the cold, distant husband, or the one who saw me as a financial burden. One particularly tense evening, Daniel arrived home earlier than usual. I greeted him with a cautious optimism, hoping for a semblance of the warmth we once shared. "You're home early. Is everything okay?" I asked. Daniel's response was curt, his eyes void of any warmth. "I left early to talk about something important. We need to discuss our finances again." His tone was not inviting a conversation, but demanding a resolution. I felt a knot form in my stomach. "What about our finances?" I inquired, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's about the mortgage, Laura. I'm not okay with shouldering most of the burden. You need to contribute more." His words were like daggers, undermining my efforts and sacrifices. I couldn't contain my frustration. "I'm already giving nearly all of my income towards the mortgage, Daniel. How much more do you expect me to contribute?" My voice was a mix of anger and desperation. Daniel leaned back, his expression one of annoyance. "That's not enough. You should consider increasing your work hours or finding a higher-paying job. Being cooped up at home isn't good for anyone." His suggestion hit me like a wave of ice-cold water. "Increase my work hours? I'm already struggling to balance my job with the housework you leave entirely to me." Daniel stood up, his demeanor turning hostile. "That's your job, Laura. I'm out working all day, earning for us. It's only fair you take care of the house, and frankly, you're not even doing a great job at that." I was stunned into silence. His words were not just hurtful. They were a complete dismissal of everything I had been doing for us, for our home. It was clear that in his eyes I was failing at being a wife, a partner. As he walked away, leaving me standing there, a mix of hurt and anger bubbling inside me, I knew something had to change. I couldn't continue living like this, constantly demeaned and undervalued. The man I married was gone, replaced by this cold, unfeeling stranger. That night, as I lay in bed, the weight of his words crushing me, I realized that my marriage was not just strained, it was broken, and I was the only one trying to fix it. It was time to stop. It was time to start thinking about myself, about my worth. And most importantly, it was time to start planning my escape from this toxic relationship. The days blurred together in a haze of resentment and disbelief. Daniel's demands and coldness continued, each word chipping away at the last remnants of our marriage. Then, one fateful day, I stumbled upon a truth that would change everything. I arrived home from work, expecting the usual empty house, only to find Daniel's car in the driveway. Confused, I entered quietly, only to hear laughter from the living room, a sound so rare in our home nowadays. Peering around the corner, my heart stopped. There was Daniel, cozy and relaxed, with Isabel, the same woman I had seen him with that day. Suppressing the urge to confront them, I retreated to the kitchen, my mind racing. This was no casual visit. The intimacy between them was palpable, undeniable. And then it hit me. Isabel wasn't just a fling, she was a full-blown affair. Later that evening, after Isabel had left, I faced Daniel. "Who is Isabel, really?" "She seems more than just a friend," I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Daniel's reaction was swift and dismissive. "She's just a colleague. Don't make a big deal out of it, Laura." But I knew better. The way he avoided my gaze, the tension in his voice, it was all too clear. Daniel was lying, and I was done being the fool. That night, I lay in bed, my mind made up. I needed proof of his betrayal, something concrete to expose him and free myself from this sham of a marriage. My plan was simple, yet risky. I would record their encounters, gather evidence of the affair. Over the next few weeks, I became a shadow in my own home, watching, waiting. The opportunity came sooner than expected. One afternoon, I returned home to find them together again. This time, I was prepared. With my phone discreetly positioned, I recorded their intimate conversation, their plans, their betrayal. As I listened to the recording later, a mix of sorrow and rage washed over me. But there was also a sense of empowerment. I had the evidence I needed. It was time to act, to end this farce and reclaim my dignity. With each step of my plan, a sense of clarity and determination grew within me. This was not just about revenge, it was about justice. For too long I had been a spectator in my own life, but no more. I was ready to face Daniel and Isabel, to expose their deceit. It was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. Armed with the evidence of Daniel's infidelity, I felt a newfound strength. It was no longer about salvaging a broken marriage, it was about exposing the truth and getting justice. But first, I needed an ally, someone who would be as impacted by this revelation as I was. My opportunity came unexpectedly. While going through Daniel's phone one evening, I discovered that Isabel was not only married, but her husband, James, was a prominent client of Daniel's firm. This was more than just personal. It was a professional bombshell that would have far-reaching consequences. I contacted James, introducing myself as Daniel's wife, and requesting a meeting under the guise of discussing an urgent matter about our spouses. We met at a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes. The look on James's face when I revealed the affair was a mixture of shock, anger, and betrayal. James's reaction was visceral. "Isabel and your husband? This is unbelievable. How long has this been going on?" he demanded, his voice shaking with emotion. I shared the evidence, watching as his face contorted with pain and fury. I had my suspicions, but this is concrete proof. She's betrayed me, and with your husband, no less. The plan was set into motion. James would confront Isabel and I would confront Daniel, both of us armed with the undeniable truth. It was a risky move, but I was past caring. I wanted to see Daniel's facade crumble, to watch him face the consequences of his actions. The confrontation with Daniel was cathartic. I watched as his face turned pale, his usual confident demeanor crumbling under the weight of his exposed secrets. "Laura, this isn't what it looks like. We can talk about this," he stammered, his voice betraying his panic. "No, Daniel, there's nothing left to talk about. I know everything. And so does James," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. The fallout was swift and devastating. James filed for divorce and cut all personal and professional ties with Daniel. Isabel's world came crashing down, and Daniel's career took a massive hit. But for me, it was a bittersweet victory. I had exposed them, but at the cost of my own marriage and the life I thought I had. As I watched Daniel's life unravel, I felt a sense of closure. It was a harsh lesson, but one that freed me from the chains of a loveless marriage. I was ready to move on, to rebuild my life on my terms. In the aftermath of the confrontation, the reality of my situation began to sink in. I watched as Daniel's meticulously constructed world fell apart. The man who once held himself with unshakable confidence was now a shadow of his former self, reeling from the impact of his own actions. The final blow came during a tense meeting at our lawyer's office to discuss the divorce proceedings. Daniel, looking defeated, tried to salvage what little he could from the ruins of his life. "Look, Laura, can't we sort this out amicably? Think about what you're doing here. This will ruin both our lives," Daniel pleaded, his voice laced with desperation. I looked at him, feeling a mixture of pity and revulsion. "Amicable? After what you did? You didn't think of our lives when you were with Isabel. It's too late for regrets, Daniel." Our lawyer, a stoic man, handed Daniel the divorce papers. "The terms are clear. Given the circumstances, there will be no alimony. You'll also need to agree on the division of assets." Daniel's face contorted in anger. "This is ridiculous. I earned most of this. She doesn't deserve half of my assets." I remained calm, my resolve unshaken. "I don't want your money, Daniel. I want my freedom. And you can keep your assets. I'm starting anew, far from the shadow of your deceit." The divorce was finalized swiftly. Daniel's career continued to spiral downward as the scandal became public knowledge. Isabel, on the other hand, faced her own set of consequences. Her marriage to James ended in a bitter divorce, and she was left to grapple with the social and professional fallout of her actions. As for me, I emerged from the chaos with a sense of liberation. I had lost my marriage, but I gained something far more valuable, my self-respect and independence. I sold the house, a place that once symbolized our shared dreams, and moved into a modest apartment, embracing my new beginning. My days were no longer filled with the dread of Daniel's return or the anguish of his betrayal. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my life, rediscovering my passions, and reconnecting with old friends. The experience had changed me, but it also strengthened me. I realized that life often throws unexpected challenges our way, and how we respond to them defines us. I chose to stand up for myself, to fight back against betrayal and deceit, and in doing so, I found a resilience I never knew I had. My name is Alexandra Bennett, and I have been married to Ethan Bennett for 15 long years. Our life, outwardly perfect, was a facade hiding a painful truth. It was a chilly evening in November when my world began to crumble. I returned home early from a friend's art exhibition, anticipating a quiet night with Ethan and our son Nathan. But what I found was the stark opposite. I heard their voices before I saw them, Ethan's and a woman's, hushed, yet passionate. Creeping closer, I heard words that cut through my heart like a serrated knife. "Once she's out of the picture, we'll have it all, Isabel. Just a little longer." Ethan's voice slithered through the air. Isabel, his mistress, laughed, a sound so cold it could freeze blood. I can't wait to see the look on her face when she finds out. You're a genius, Ethan. Their cruel laughter echoed in the hallway, a sinister symphony that shattered my trust. I stood frozen, a statue of disbelief, as their plan to upend my life unfolded with each word. I had known about Ethan's infidelities, his late nights, the scent of foreign perfume, the lipstick stains I pretended not to see, but this was a betrayal of a different caliber. He wasn't just unfaithful, he was plotting against me, our son, our life. Stumbling back, I found myself in Nathan's room. He was my anchor, my 14-year-old, who looked so much like his father, but with a gentleness Ethan never possessed. "Mom, you're home early." Nathan's voice was tinged with surprise. "Is everything okay?" I forced a smile, my heart breaking in silence. "Everything's fine, honey. Just tired, that's all." I couldn't burden him, not yet. Not until I understood the full extent of Ethan's treachery. That night, as I lay in bed next to the man who had just vowed to dismantle my life, a plan began to take shape in my mind. Ethan thought he could discard me like an old toy, but I was not going to be a silent victim in his cruel game. The stakes were high, but I was ready to play. This was not just about me anymore, it was about Nathan, our future, and the justice we deserved. Ethan Bennett was about to learn that every action has its consequences, and I was going to be the one to teach him that lesson. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, was the unexpected ally in a house divided by secrets and lies. Despite her son's despicable nature, Eleanor's affection for me and Nathan had always been genuine. She was the first person I confided in about Ethan's betrayal. In the privacy of her quaint living room, with its floral curtains and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, I found the courage to speak. "Eleanor, Ethan is planning to leave me for another woman. He's been plotting this for a while." Her reaction was a mix of anger and sorrow. "That boy has always been selfish. But this, Alexandra, you and Nathan don't deserve this." Eleanor's empathy was a balm, but it was her next words that sparked a fire within me. "We need to protect you and Nathan. Ethan can't just get away with this." The conversation turned to action. We needed a plan, one that would expose Ethan's true colors and safeguard our future. It was a game of chess, and we were 2 moves away from checkmate. Meanwhile, Nathan's bond with his father was disintegrating. I overheard their conversation one evening, a dialogue laced with disappointment and unspoken accusations. "Why are you never home, Dad? You missed my soccer game again." Nathan's voice was a mix of hurt and accusation. Ethan's response was dismissive, his usual defense mechanism. "Business, Nathan. You'll understand when you're older. Priorities, son." But Nathan was older than his years. "Mom's always there. Are we not your priority, Dad?" The conversation ended with Ethan walking away, a cowardly retreat from a confrontation he couldn't win. Nathan's eyes, so much like his father's, yet filled with a depth Ethan never had, met mine. We didn't need words. Our resolve was unspoken. Eleanor and I continued to weave our web. We gathered evidence, bank statements, photographs, and messages. Every piece was a testament to Ethan's betrayal. Our plan was taking shape, a strategy not just for revenge, but for justice. As I tucked Nathan into bed that night, his innocent face asleep in the moonlit room, my resolve hardened. This was no longer just a battle, it was a war for our dignity, for our future. Ethan Bennett, in his arrogance, had underestimated the strength of the bonds he sought to break. He was about to learn that the ties of kinship were stronger than his web of lies. The morning I decided to confront Ethan was draped in an eerie silence. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind, but nothing could prepare me for the reality of it. He was at the kitchen table, his back to me, engrossed in his phone. Without a word, I slid the envelope across the table. It contained the irrefutable evidence of his infidelity, pictures of him with Isabel, receipts from extravagant gifts, and damning messages. Ethan's reaction was a cocktail of shock, denial, and then, disgustingly, amusement. "You've been snooping around, Alexandra? Is this some sort of joke?" His attempt to downplay his betrayal only fueled my resolve. "This is no joke, Ethan. You've been planning to leave me for Isabel. I know everything." For a moment, Ethan's facade cracked, revealing the coward beneath. "Alexandra, let's be reasonable. We can sort this out." "Sort this out?" I echoed, my voice rising. You want to abandon your family for your mistress, and you think we can sort this out? The room was thick with tension, a tangible force that seemed to suffocate any remnants of love we once shared. Ethan's next words were the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. Alexandra, you're overreacting. Isabel understands me in ways you never could. I need someone younger, more vibrant. His words were a slap in the face, a confirmation of every fear and insecurity I had ever felt in our marriage. But they also ignited a fire within me, a fire of defiance and strength. Vibrant? I retorted, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Is that what you call betrayal these days? It was clear then that there was no salvaging our marriage. Ethan had made his choice, and it was not me, not us. I left the room with a newfound determination. I would not be a victim of Ethan Bennett's selfish whims. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Meetings with lawyers, discussions with Eleanor, and late-night planning sessions. We were building a case, not just for divorce, but for justice. And then came the health scare, a routine checkup that turned into a series of tests, the results of which left me reeling. Possible breast cancer? The doctor had said, her voice a blend of professional detachment and sympathy. I was stunned, my mind a chaos of fear and uncertainty. But amidst the turmoil, a plan began to take shape. A plan that would expose Ethan's true nature once and for all. We'll tell Ethan about the diagnosis, Eleanor suggested during one of our strategy meetings. Let's see if there's any humanity left in him. It was a gamble, but one we were willing to take. Ethan's reaction to my potential illness would be the ultimate test of his character. It was a test I was almost certain he would fail. The day we decided to reveal my diagnosis to Ethan, the air in the house was thick with anticipation. Eleanor had come over, her presence a source of strength as I prepared to face my husband. Ethan returned home late, as usual, the smell of expensive cologne and deceit clinging to him. Eleanor and I sat in the living room, the envelope containing my medical reports on the coffee table. His eyes flickered with a blend of curiosity and irritation as he walked in. Alexandra, what's this about? You said it was urgent. Ethan's voice held a note of impatience. I took a deep breath, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Ethan, I went to the doctor last week. They suspect it might be breast cancer. The words hung in the air, heavy with the gravity of their implication. I watched Ethan closely, searching for a flicker of concern, of love. But what I saw was far more chilling. Breast cancer? That's unfortunate, Ethan said, his voice devoid of warmth. But what does this mean for us? Us. The word echoed mockingly in the room. There was no us, not anymore. Eleanor's gaze was piercing, her disappointment in her son palpable. It means, Ethan, that your wife needs you now more than ever. She needs your support. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between the envelope and the door. Right, of course. We'll figure this out. I need some air. And with that, he left, his retreat as cowardly as it was revealing. His reaction, or lack thereof, was all the confirmation we needed. Eleanor's hand found mine, her grip firm. We know what we have to do, Alexandra. The following weeks were a blur of activity. My condition worsened according to the narrative we fed Ethan. His visits were sporadic, brief, and devoid of any real concern. It was clear that his thoughts were elsewhere, with Isabel, with his escape plan. But Ethan wasn't the only one making plans. Eleanor and I, with the help of my lawyer, were meticulously crafting the trap that would strip Ethan of his power and reveal his true nature to the world. The climax of our plan came one evening when Ethan returned home to find his belongings packed in boxes, his precious possessions stripped from their usual places. What the hell is this, Alexandra? Ethan exploded, his composure finally cracking. It's over, Ethan, I said, my voice steady, despite the storm raging inside me. I know about Isabel, about your plans to leave me, and I won't be a silent bystander in your little drama anymore. Ethan's face was a canvas of rage and disbelief. You can't do this to me. I'm Ethan Bennett. You're nothing without me. But he was wrong. I was Alexandra Bennett, and I was more than he would ever understand. This was my retribution, my stand against the man who had vowed to love and protect me, but had chosen betrayal instead. As Ethan stormed out, his threats and curses echoing through the empty house, I felt a sense of liberation. The facade was gone, and the truth was laid bare. Eleanor stood by my side, her presence a testament to the strength of the bonds that Ethan had tried and failed to sever. "You did well, Alexandra. Now let's see this through to the end." The day of reckoning had arrived. The morning air was crisp and charged with a sense of impending justice as Eleanor and I prepared for the final act of our plan against Ethan. I sat in the lawyer's office, my fingers nervously tapping on the polished mahogany desk. Today we were to confront Ethan with the divorce papers and the full extent of his financial betrayal. The evidence was laid out neatly in folders, each document a testament to his greed and deceit. Eleanor was a rock beside me, her resolve as firm as her disapproval of her son's actions. "He won't see this coming," she whispered, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. The door opened, and Ethan walked in, his usual arrogance replaced with a hint of unease. He glanced at the documents, then at us, his expression one of wary confusion. "What's this about, Alexandra? Why am I here?" Ethan's voice was cautious, a far cry from his usual dismissive tone. I took a deep breath, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. "This is about the end, Ethan. The end of our marriage and the end of your lies." Ethan's eyes widened as he flipped through the documents, bank statements, property deeds, evidence of his financial infidelities, all laid bare for him to see. "This can't be happening," he muttered, his composure slipping. "You can't do this to me." Eleanor leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "You did this to yourself, Ethan. You chose betrayal over your family. Now you face the consequences." The lawyer, a stern woman with an air of unyielding authority, began to outline the terms of the divorce, the division of assets, the alimony, the child support, each point a nail in the coffin of Ethan's grand plans. Ethan's protests grew more desperate, his pleas more pathetic. "You can't leave me with nothing. I'm your husband, Alexandra. We can work this out." But it was too late for negotiations, too late for remorse. "There's nothing left to work out, Ethan. You made your choice. Now, I'm making mine." The meeting ended with Ethan storming out, his threats of revenge and legal battles echoing hollowly in the office. But his words held no power over me anymore. I had seen the man behind the mask, and I was no longer afraid. As we left the lawyer's office, Eleanor's hand found mine, a silent show of solidarity and strength. "You're free, Alexandra. You and Nathan can start anew." And she was right. Despite the turmoil and pain, I felt a sense of liberation, a weight lifted from my shoulders. The battle was over, but the war was just beginning. Ethan Bennett would learn that the price of betrayal was high, and I would be there to ensure he paid it in full. The house felt eerily quiet after Ethan's departure, the silence a stark contrast to the years of deceit and turmoil. But in that stillness, there was a sense of emerging victory. Nathan, now aware of the full extent of his father's betrayal, was a pillar of support. "Mom, we're better off without him," he said one evening as we sat in the living room, a space that once echoed with Ethan's false promises. I nodded, pride swelling in my heart for the young man my son had become. "Yes, Nathan, we are." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Ethan, stripped of his bravado, was a shadow of the man he once pretended to be. His once lavish lifestyle crumbled under the weight of the financial restrictions Eleanor and I had imposed. Then came the day of the final hearing. The courthouse was a monument to justice, its hallowed halls a fitting backdrop for Ethan's downfall. As we entered the courtroom, Ethan's eyes met mine, a mix of anger and desperation in his gaze. But I was no longer the woman he thought he could manipulate and control. The judge, a stern figure of authority, called the court to order. The proceedings were a blur, but each word from the judge was a strike against Ethan's fortress of lies. "You have not only failed in your duties as a husband and father, Mr. Bennett, but you have also squandered your family's resources for selfish gains," the judge said, his voice echoing through the room. Ethan's plea for leniency fell on deaf ears. The evidence of his infidelity and financial misconduct was overwhelming. The judge's verdict was swift and unyielding. "You are hereby ordered to pay substantial alimony and child support. Furthermore, your assets will be divided as per the agreed-upon terms." Ethan's face drained of color, his future as bleak as the judgment being passed. He had lost everything: his family, his reputation, and now his wealth. As we left the courtroom, Nathan's hand in mine, I felt a sense of closure. The legal battle was over, and justice had been served. Ethan's reign of deceit had come to an end, and with it, the chapter of our lives that he had tainted. We stepped out into the sunlight, the world seeming brighter, more hopeful. Nathan looked up at me, a smile on his face. "Mom, we did it. We're free." Yes, we were free. Free from Ethan's lies, free from the shadows of the past. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope and the promise of a brighter future. Ethan Bennett had learned the hard way that the wheels of justice, though they grind slowly, grind exceedingly fine. The days following the court's decision were a time of reflection and renewal. The house, once a battleground of secrets and lies, now resonated with the promise of a new beginning. Nathan and I spent our days planning for the future, a future unmarred by Ethan's shadow. One afternoon, as the golden light of the setting sun filled the living room, Nathan turned to me, his eyes thoughtful. "Mom, do you ever regret it? Marrying Dad, I mean." I paused, considering the weight of the question. "No, Nathan. Despite everything, I don't regret it. Your father gave me the greatest gift, you, and through all this, I've found a strength I never knew I had." Nathan nodded, understanding reflecting in his eyes. "I'm proud of you, Mom. You stood up to him, fought back. It wasn't just for me, Nathan. It was for us, for our future," I said, reaching out to squeeze his hand. In the weeks that followed, news of Ethan's downfall spread. His reputation, once that of a successful businessman, was now tarnished beyond repair. But our focus was no longer on Ethan's fate. It was on rebuilding our lives. Eleanor remained a constant presence, her support unwavering. "You've both been so strong," she said one day as we shared a quiet lunch. "I'm sorry Ethan couldn't be the man you deserved, Alexandra." "Eleanor, you've been more than family to me," I replied, gratitude welling in my heart. "You and Harrison have shown us kindness and love more than I could have asked for." As the seasons changed, so did our lives. Nathan excelled in his studies, his resilience shining through, and I found solace in my work, my art, rediscovering passions I had long suppressed under Ethan's shadow. One evening, as Nathan and I sat on the porch watching the stars twinkle in the night sky, I felt a sense of peace. The pain of the past was fading, leaving behind lessons and newfound strength. "Mom, what's next for us?" Nathan asked, his voice filled with hope. "Whatever we want, Nathan. We have a whole world to explore, dreams to chase. We're free to live our lives on our terms," I said, my heart full of optimism. We sat there, mother and son, looking up at the vast expanse of the night sky, our hearts light with the promise of new beginnings. The darkness of the past was behind us, and ahead lay a path illuminated by the light of our courage and love. Ethan Bennett's shadow had been lifted, and in its place was the bright dawn of our new life, a life built on truth, strength, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her son. I sat in our living room, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, had just told me over the phone that I wouldn't be joining the family trip. "You'll be staying home because it's not enjoyable when outsiders are around," she said with a tone that stung. As she mentioned something about bringing back souvenirs, her voice dripped with sarcasm. The call ended abruptly, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I looked around, feeling out of place in the house that was supposed to be a temporary refuge. When David and I married, I never imagined that living with his parents would be so challenging. But after our apartment got damaged, his mother, Eleanor, insisted we stay with them. At first, it seemed like a good idea, but I quickly learned that her kindness was a mask for her controlling nature. Every day with Eleanor was a test of patience. She had a way of making me feel small, questioning my every move, from how I cooked to how I cleaned. It was exhausting, trying to live up to her standards, knowing I would never meet them. And David, he just stayed quiet, caught between us. I remember how different things were when David and I first met. We worked together and slowly became friends, and then more. He was different then, more assertive, more present. But living with his parents changed him, or maybe it just showed a side of him I hadn't seen before. I always knew that Eleanor preferred her son over anyone else, but I never thought it would affect me this way. I tried to fit in, to be the daughter-in-law she wanted, but nothing seemed to work. The more I tried, the more she pushed me away. Now, sitting here, feeling like an outsider in what was supposed to be my home, I realized that something had to change. I couldn't keep living like this, always feeling unwanted and unappreciated. As I put away the suitcase I had started to pack for the trip, a sense of determination filled me. Eleanor may have won this round, but I wasn't going to let her dictate my happiness. I had to find a way to stand up for myself, to show that I wasn't just an extension of her family, but a person with my own worth. As I put away my suitcase, I couldn't help but think back to how different life was when David and I first met. We worked at the same company, in different departments, but our paths crossed often. It started with casual conversations by the coffee machine, which turned into lunches, and eventually, dates. David was charming, kind, and he made me laugh. It was easy to fall in love with him. We got married 3 years ago, and at first, our life together was everything I had hoped for. We had our own apartment, and we were building our life together. But then, an unexpected fire in the neighboring unit turned our lives upside down. Our apartment was damaged, and we were suddenly homeless. That's when Eleanor stepped in. "Why don't you two stay at our place?" she had offered. It seemed like a good solution at the time. David was relieved, and honestly, so was I. But I didn't realize the price I'd have to pay for that help. Living with David's parents was challenging from the start. Eleanor had always been polite, but once we moved in, her true colors showed. She criticized how I did the laundry, how I cooked, even how I decorated our room. It felt like she was constantly watching and judging me. David, on the other hand, seemed oblivious to it all. He was happy to be back in his childhood home, and I think part of him enjoyed being taken care of by his mother again. I tried to talk to him about how I felt, but he just didn't see it. "She's just set in her ways," he'd say, or, "You know how moms are." But Eleanor wasn't just any mom. She was a mom who made it clear I wasn't good enough for her son. Despite the tension, I tried to make the best of the situation. I thought that if I could just prove to Eleanor that I was a good wife, a good person, she would accept me. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. Her house, her rules. Looking back, I wonder if I was naive to think I could win her over. Maybe I should have pushed David harder to move out, to find our own place again. But I didn't, and here I was, stuck in a house where I wasn't wanted, preparing to be left behind while they all went on a family trip without me. As I closed the closet door on the suitcase, I realized that this was more than just about a missed trip. It was about finding my place in this family, or maybe realizing that I never would. I needed to figure out what my next move was, for my own sake. Sitting alone in the house, I began to reflect on the escalating tensions with Eleanor. It wasn't just the snide comments or the constant criticism. It was the way she made me feel like I didn't belong in my own home. My efforts to be a good wife and daughter-in-law seemed to vanish into thin air, never enough to please her. I thought back to the countless evenings spent in silence after another of Eleanor's remarks. Sometimes it was about how I arranged the living room or the way I spoke. Other times it was more personal, like questioning my career choices or why David and I hadn't started a family yet. Each comment was a subtle jab, reminding me that I wasn't living up to her standards. David's reaction, or lack thereof, hurt the most. He always seemed to find a middle ground, trying not to upset either of us. But in doing so, he often sided with his mother. I understood his difficult position, but I couldn't help feeling abandoned. "She's just worried about us," he would say, trying to justify her behavior. But it felt like a betrayal every time he failed to stand up for me. I kept myself busy with work and household chores, partly to avoid confrontation and partly to prove my worth. I worked part-time at a local supermarket, a job that Eleanor deemed unambitious. But I liked it. It gave me a sense of independence and a break from the tense atmosphere at home. Yet, no matter how hard I worked or how much I tried to keep the peace, it was never enough for Eleanor. Her house was her kingdom, and I was merely an unwelcome guest. It was a constant struggle, trying to maintain my identity while being overshadowed by her presence. I remember one particularly harsh weekend. I had just finished cleaning the entire house, a task that Eleanor usually criticized. Expecting another round of complaints, I was surprised when she walked in and said nothing. I thought maybe, just maybe, I had done something right. But then, as I sat down with a cup of coffee, she appeared out of nowhere. "Jessica, your cleaning is too sloppy." You need to spend more time on it and put some gratitude into it for your hardworking husband. As his wife, it's your duty to support him." Her words stung, and I felt my efforts crumble under her scrutiny. I tried to argue, to defend myself, but it was useless. Eleanor had made up her mind about me, and nothing I said or did would change that. It was a lonely feeling, being in a house full of people yet feeling utterly alone. As I sat there, lost in my thoughts, I realized how much this situation was affecting me. My confidence had taken a hit, and I was constantly second-guessing myself. I knew something had to change, but I wasn't sure what or how. I just knew I couldn't keep living under Eleanor's shadow, constantly trying to prove myself to someone who had already decided I wasn't enough. I had to admit, the idea of a spa getaway with David had initially filled me with a sense of excitement, a chance for us to rekindle our relationship away from the pressures of his family home. We discussed destinations with soft giggles and whispered dreams, circling dates on the calendar that promised a respite from the cold reality of our daily lives. But my optimism had been a delicate bubble, one that Eleanor effortlessly popped with her intrusive demands. She transformed our intimate plans into a family excursion to celebrate her anniversary with George, David's father. My heart sank when David, caught in his mother's excitement, echoed her sentiments, claiming that a family trip would be just as enjoyable. The promise he'd whispered to me, that next time it would be just the two of us, felt fragile in his earnest reassurances. I agreed, though reluctance weighed on every word, and I threw myself into the trip's preparation, hoping that my efforts would at least be seen and appreciated. I delved into the organization with an energy that surprised even me. Perhaps deep down, it was an attempt to regain some control over a situation that had swiftly slipped from my grasps. I chose the sights we would see, the food we would taste, and the bed where we would lay our heads, quietly taking solace in the small victory that Eleanor seemed disinterested in the logistics. The day before our departure was a whirlwind of activity, of lists checked and bags packed. It was with weary satisfaction that I finally allowed my head to hit the pillow, mentally reviewing the itinerary one last time before succumbing to sleep. My alarm's call the next morning was a harsh one, screaming at me to rise and face the day. But when I stirred, the space beside me was empty, and an uneasy feeling curled in my stomach. I called for David, searched the house, and found only silence as my answer. Panic fluttered in my chest as I reached for my phone, trying to quell the fear with every ring. And then Eleanor answered, her voice echoing cheerfully through the line from the road, removing any doubt about what had happened. They'd left, just as simply as that, with no regard for me or the plans we'd made. My protests were met with mockery and a swift click of finality as the line went dead. So there I was, alone with my luggage and a void where my family was supposed to be. I could have crumbled, I suppose. I could have let the sadness drown me. But instead, I laughed, a sound of disbelief and resolve intermingled. I'll show them, I thought, anger and determination giving rise to a sudden plan. I opened my laptop and with a few clicks, booked myself a trip that mirrored the one I was supposed to be on, a room just for me in a luxury hotel I had wanted to visit, a table for one in a restaurant with glowing reviews. I packed my bag with an enthusiasm that felt both liberating and bittersweet. Stepping out of the house, I felt the sun on my face, a gentle encouragement for the journey ahead. I boarded the train, alone and unyielding in my decision to enjoy this time for myself. As the landscape whisked by, I could feel the threads of my former life loosening, the hold of Eleanor's world diminishing with every mile. I would find my happiness, with or without their approval. And if by chance I crossed paths with the family I had thought was mine, I would hold my head high. They might have denied me a place in their trip, but they couldn't take away my spirit or my joy. As the train neared the final station, I wrapped the shawl tighter around my shoulders, partly against the chill of early morning, and partly in anticipation. The solo trip had not been part of my plan, but it now felt like an act of quiet defiance, a reclaiming of my own narrative. I arrived at the quaint tourist town that was meant to be the backdrop of a romantic trip with David. The glaring absence of his company gave way to a newfound sense of independence. I let my whims direct me, browsing through shops lined with handmade crafts, enjoying the rich aroma of local coffee blends, and laughing with street performers that animated the cobblestone walkways. Every sight was seen through a lens of self-discovery, and every experience felt deeply personal. The weight of the agony caused by Eleanor and David's abandonment began to lift, replaced by a lighter, freer sensation that bubbled within me. I was alone, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel lonely. The day waned, and the evening hues painted the sky, signaling it was time to check into the luxurious hotel I had impulsively booked. I had chosen the best, as a treat to myself for enduring the silent battles at home. As I approached the grand facade, a commotion at the entrance caught my attention. There, among the plush velvet and glinting chandeliers, were Eleanor, David, and George, clearly in distress. I tucked myself behind a decorative pillar, curiosity piqued. Eleanor's voice carried across the lobby, tinged with irritation, wondering aloud why they could not secure a room. Clearly, they hadn't managed to find an accommodation after leaving me behind. David spotted me before I could decide what to do. He called out, a mix of astonishment and guilt flashing across his face as he approached. "Jessica, we couldn't check into the room you booked," he stammered, and Eleanor followed, her face tight with barely contained rage. "Of course you couldn't," I replied with a cool tone I barely recognized as my own. "The reservation was in my name, and I hadn't checked in. Without my presence, the keys would remain unclaimed. A simple policy, but effective." Their predicament could have been a satisfying sight, but the joy of their discomfort was overshadowed by a sense of sorrow. This trip was a culmination of the disrespect and disregard they'd shown me since moving into their home. Their petty victory in leaving me behind now seemed like a hollow gain. Eleanor's temper flared as David tried futilely to negotiate with the hotel staff. Ultimately, the sight of them being ushered out by security was more pitiful than amusing. Eleanor vowed to find somewhere better, but her words sounded hollow and desperate. I turned from the scene that was once my family drama and approached the check-in counter, ready for a night of solitude in the peace of an elegant room. With my belongings in tow and my head held high, I stepped across the threshold into the next chapter of my life, one filled with possibilities and untouched by Eleanor's shadow. Turning back was not an option, not now, not after all that had transpired. Checking into the hotel felt like stepping into another world, a sanctuary of luxury and tranquility that seemed almost surreal against the rough fabric of recent events. The room I was escorted to boasted grand windows, an opulent bed, and a balcony that offered a breathtaking view of the setting sun. Alone, I unpacked my suitcase, each article of clothing a reminder of the journey I had embarked upon, both physically and emotionally. I decided to explore the hotel, and as I walked through the elegant corridors, I could feel layers of stress peel off with every step. By the time I returned to the grand lobby, I was transformed, no longer the cast-aside wife, but a woman on an adventure of her own making. As I lounged on a plush sofa, savoring my newfound peace, I overheard a hushed conversation that snatched at my attention. A pair of women discussing a harrowing tale about a nearby hotel with a tarnished reputation. They spoke of thefts, strange noises, and an unsolved mystery of a past guest's untimely death. The details sent a chill across my skin, and I couldn't help but wonder if Eleanor, David, and George had stumbled into that very place in their desperate search for a room. Shaking off the unsettling tale, I made my way to dinner, alone yet content. The meal was sumptuous, each bite an indulgence that soothed more than just hunger. I was celebrating not the dissolution of my family ties, but my resilience, my strength to rise from the emotional quagmire that had threatened to ensnare me. Returning to my room, the night embraced me like an old friend, cocooning me in its velvet quiet. As I prepared for bed, my phone lit up, a call from Eleanor. They had found a room, she crowed, reveling in their small triumph. I bit back a warning about the notorious hotel, my instincts urging caution. But her laughter at my concern quickly trampled any goodwill. "Enjoy being regretful," she jeered before the line went dead. I could have persisted, could have tried to save them from potential peril, but my patience was exhausted. Eleanor had made her bed, and now she'd have to lie in it, be it in a haunted hotel or a bed of roses. I turned off my phone, severing the final tether to the chaos of my old life. That night, as I slept in a bed far too large for one person, I dreamed of freedom, a vast open space waiting for me to fill it with new memories, new laughter, free from the binds of family strife. And as the dawn began to breach the night's darkness, I knew that one chapter of my life had ended, and another was ready to begin. Morning light filtered gently through diaphanous curtains. It coaxed me awake with a gentle warmth, a stark contrast to the cold dread that had settled in my heart the night before. As I sat up, the previous evening's encounter with David and his family, and the later ominous phone call, replayed in my mind. After a leisurely breakfast, I ventured out again to savor this precious gift of solitude and exploration. I strolled through a nearby park, admired the art in a local gallery, and indulged in some light shopping, allowing the simple pleasure of making decisions solely for myself. As the afternoon sun began to wane, I returned to the warmth of my temporary haven. My mind dwelled on Eleanor's last call, the triumph in her voice as she described the hidden gem of a hotel they had stumbled upon, and my suppressed fears about its rumored dark history. I pushed aside the unsettling thoughts and decided to focus on my present, a reality filled with tranquility and escape from familial conflict. That evening, I dined at the hotel restaurant, where the soft tinkling of piano keys filled the air with melodies of serenity. It was there, amidst the quiet chatter of other diners, that my resolve solidified. I would not allow my newfound peace to be disrupted. Retiring to my room, I mused over the journey of self-discovery that had begun quite unexpectedly. It dawned on me how much I had sublimated my own needs, desires, and identity for the sake of fitting into David's family. They had left me behind, but in doing so, they had unwittingly set me free. And then, my peaceful contemplation was rudely interrupted by the chime of my smartphone. It was Eleanor again, her voice unnaturally bright as she told me about their comfortable hotel stay. Despite the shiver that ran down my spine, I kept my tone light as I recommended caution due to the eerie rumors. Her response was laughter, derisive, confident, and steeped in denial. One last time, the dawn of concern tried to rise within me to warn them of potential dangers. But Eleanor's flippant goodbye silenced my compassion. I was done being the woman who worried about those who had left her in the dust with little more than thinly veiled contempt. The sound of my smartphone powering down reverberated through the silence, like a door closing on that chapter of my life. No longer would I be the doormat for Eleanor's self-righteousness or the tension in David's divided heart. It was time to move forward, to find my place in the world where I could bloom unimpeded by the chill of familial disregard. Sleep found me easily that night, and it was deep, peaceful, void of the nightmarish scenarios that had threatened to haunt me. When I awoke, it was with a clarity and a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. It was time to leave, not just the hotel, but everything that represented my old life. As I checked out and stepped onto the train home, I knew without a doubt that I was journeying not just toward a place, but toward a future, crafted by my own design. The train ride back to what had been my home brought a cascade of mixed emotions. Despite the serenity I had discovered within myself during the trip, a sense of foreboding loomed over me as the familiar landscape came into view. I was returning to a place where my presence had become a point of contention, and now I was ready to face whatever awaited me. Upon arriving, the aura of the family home felt different, almost charged with an anxious energy. The light that spilled from the windows seemed harsh, a beacon that screamed of tumult rather than the warmth of a welcome. With every step I took towards the door, determination steeled my resolve. "I'm home," I announced, as casually as I could manage, pushing the door open. The reaction was immediate. My presence stirred the occupants into a frenzy of exclamations and finger-pointing. As the noise died down, Eleanor relayed the story of their nightmarish stay in a fearful, breathless torrent. They had spent the night in the very hotel that had been the subject of terrifying The day the tornado hit, I was at work, my mind buried in mundane tasks, unaware of the chaos brewing at home. It was a typical spring day in our small town, the kind where the weather can't decide between sunshine and storms. When my phone rang, displaying my neighbor's number, I felt a spike of unease. "Emily, you need to come home now," her voice trembled. "It's your house, the tornado." My heart sank. I rushed through the emptying streets, the sky a menacing shade of gray. Turning onto our street was like entering a nightmare. Trees uprooted, power lines down, our neighborhood looked like a war zone. And there, standing defiant yet wounded, was our home. The sight of it brought a lump to my throat. Windows shattered, the roof partially torn off, our beloved home was a shell of its former self. But it was still standing. That was something. Thankfully, no one was home when the tornado struck. My husband, Mark, and our 2 kids were safe, which was all that truly mattered. But as we stood there, surveying the damage, I felt a sense of loss for the life we had built within those walls. We spent the next few hours salvaging what we could. Our neighbors, true to the spirit of our tight-knit community, rallied around us, offering help and support. In the midst of this chaos, there was a sense of unity, a shared resolve to rebuild not just our home, but our lives. That evening, we found temporary refuge at my sister's house. Exhausted, I finally had a moment to sit down and check my phone. It buzzed relentlessly with messages and missed calls. As I scrolled through, one particular notification caught my eye. It was a Facebook post from my mother-in-law, Linda. The post was dramatic, to say the least, claiming our house was completely destroyed. I felt a surge of irritation. Linda had had a penchant for exaggeration, especially on social media, but this was a new low, even for her. "Can you believe this?" I showed the post to Mark, who let out a weary sigh. "She just doesn't get it," he said, his voice a mix of anger and resignation. "She knows I hate it when she posts about our personal life." The post had already gathered a string of comments, people expressing shock and sorrow, offering prayers and help. It was a kind gesture from the community, but based on false pretenses. I wanted to correct the post, to set the record straight, but Mark placed a hand on my shoulder. "Let's just deal with it tomorrow," he said. "We've got enough on our plate right now." He was right, of course. But as I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, I couldn't shake off a growing sense of anger. Linda's actions, though perhaps well-intentioned, had crossed a line, and I was determined to make her understand that. The morning light did little to ease the heaviness in my heart. As I scrolled through the endless messages on my phone, Linda's post from last night glared back at me, a stark reminder of the unwanted drama unfolding alongside our real crisis. Sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, I pondered my next move. Mark, ever the peacemaker, suggested letting it go, focusing on our immediate needs instead. But the more I thought about it, the more Linda's actions bothered me. It wasn't just about the post. It was about respect, privacy, and understanding boundaries. I decided to call Linda, hoping a direct conversation might resolve the issue. The phone rang, and after a couple of tones, her cheerful voice filled the line. "Emily, darling, how are you holding up? I've been so worried." "Linda, we need to talk about your Facebook post," I said, cutting to the chase. There was a pause on the other end. "Oh, that," she replied, her tone shifting. "I was just trying to let our friends and family know what happened. Gather some support for you all." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my frustration in check. "Linda, our house wasn't destroyed. It's badly damaged, yes, but your post is misleading, and Mark specifically dislikes personal matters being shared on social media." There was another pause, longer this time. "Well, I didn't mean any harm," she said defensively. "I just wanted to help." I softened my tone. "I appreciate that, Linda, but this isn't the way. Can you please correct the post? People are worried unnecessarily." There was a reluctant murmur of agreement from her before we ended the call. I felt a small victory, but the irritation lingered. I couldn't shake off the feeling that Linda's actions were more about garnering attention for herself than genuinely helping us. The rest of the day was a blur of phone calls and arrangements, insurance agents, contractors, family members offering help. In the midst of it all, I kept thinking about Linda and the impact of her thoughtlessness. It was a small part of a much larger problem, but it felt symbolic of the lack of understanding and respect that had always tinged our relationship. That evening, as we gathered at my sister's house for a makeshift dinner, the conversation inevitably turned to the Facebook fiasco. My sister, always the outspoken one, didn't mince words. "You should give her a taste of her own medicine," she said, half joking. "See how she likes it when her personal business is all over the internet." Her words, meant in jest, sparked an idea in my mind. A plan began to form, one that would teach Linda a lesson in a way she wouldn't expect. It was risky, potentially petty, but at that moment, it felt like the perfect response to an ongoing problem. The next day dawned with a sense of purpose for me. As I surveyed the damage to our home once more, I couldn't help but think about the unnecessary chaos Linda's post had caused. The more I reflected on it, the more it felt like a symptom of a much larger issue in our relationship with her. She often overstepped boundaries without considering the consequences, and this time, I was determined to make her realize the impact of her actions. Meanwhile, the ripple effect of Linda's exaggerated post continued. Mark's aunt, who had taken the post at face value, had shared her own version of the story, further distorting the truth. This led to a cascade of concerned calls and messages, adding to our already overwhelming situation. Mark, seeing the stress it was causing, finally agreed that something needed to be done. "I just don't understand why she always has to make things about her," he said, frustration evident in his voice. As we sat in the living room of my sister's house, surrounded by a few salvaged belongings, the reality of our situation hit me. We were in the middle of a crisis, yet part of our energy was being drained by a needless social media drama. That evening, I started to put my plan into action. It was simple, yet effective. I would give Linda a taste of her own medicine by sharing a post about her on Facebook. But not just any post. It would be a carefully crafted story, exaggerated just enough to make a point, yet harmless enough not to cause real damage. I spent some time composing the post, ensuring it was just right. "Feeling grateful for Linda," I began, "who bravely saved a stray cat during the storm and is now nursing it back to health at home." It was a complete fabrication, of course, but plausible enough to be believed. I hesitated for a moment before hitting post. This was not my usual style, but desperate times called for desperate measures. I thought about the stress her post had caused us, and with a mix of apprehension and determination, I shared the story. Within minutes, the post started to gain traction. Comments poured in, praising Linda's heroism and kindness. I watched as the notifications flooded in, a part of me feeling guilty for stooping to her level, yet another part feeling a sense of vindication. The following day, Linda called, flustered and overwhelmed by the attention the post had garnered. "Emily, I don't know what to do. Everyone is asking about this cat, and I don't even have one." I tried to keep my voice steady. "It's overwhelming when people share things about you on social media, isn't it?" There was a long pause on the other end. I see your point," she finally said, her voice a mixture of embarrassment and realization. It was a small victory, but an important one. Linda had finally experienced firsthand the impact of her actions. It was a lesson in empathy, delivered through the very medium she couldn't resist. The aftermath of my Facebook post was immediate and revealing. The phone call with Linda had ended on an awkward note, but it sparked a necessary conversation. Later that day, she came over to my sister's house, a rare gesture of humility in her eyes. "I didn't realize how my actions affected you and Mark," Linda began, her usual confident demeanor replaced by a hint of vulnerability. "I never intended to cause you more stress." I appreciated her effort to understand, but years of accumulated frustration bubbled to the surface. "Linda, it's not just about the post. It's about respecting our privacy. Mark has told you many times he doesn't like personal things shared on social media." Linda nodded, looking genuinely remorseful. "I guess I got carried away with wanting to be a part of everything. I didn't think about the consequences." The conversation that followed was long overdue. We talked about boundaries, respect, and the importance of communication. For the first time, I felt like Linda was truly listening, not just hearing what she wanted to. Mark joined us, and together, we began to untangle the complicated web of our family dynamics. It was a difficult conversation, filled with moments of tension and relief, but it was necessary, a step towards understanding and healing. As Linda left, she turned to me. Thank you for the eye-opener, Emily. I promise to be more thoughtful in the future. The confrontation had been cathartic, but it left me with mixed feelings. My plan had worked, but I couldn't shake off the guilt of using deception, even if it was for a good cause. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. We began the arduous process of repairing our home, buoyed by the support of our community. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a sense of purpose and determination. In the midst of the chaos, I often found myself reflecting on the confrontation with Linda. It had been a turning point, not just in our relationship with her, but in how I viewed conflicts and resolutions. I realized that sometimes it takes a drastic measure to bring about change, but the real challenge lies in handling the consequences with grace and understanding. As we slowly put our home and lives back together, I felt a newfound sense of resilience. The tornado had taken much from us, but it had also given us something unexpected, a chance to rebuild, not just our house, but our relationships and ourselves. In the days following the confrontation with Linda, there was a palpable shift in our family dynamics. The air was clearer, albeit still tinged with the remnants of past grievances. Linda's visits became more considerate, and our conversations more meaningful. Yet a part of me remained wary, unconvinced that old habits could change so quickly. As we navigated through the complexities of rebuilding our home, I found myself mulling over the effectiveness of my little plot. It was a tactic I was not proud of, but it had sparked a necessary change. This realization led me to reflect on the concept of revenge. Was it always a negative impulse, or could it, in some contexts, be a catalyst for positive change? I discussed these thoughts with Mark one evening as we sat amidst boxes of salvaged belongings at my sister's house. I keep thinking about what I did with that Facebook post, I admitted. Part of me feels guilty, but another part feels like it was the only way to get through to your mom. Mark took my hand, his eyes understanding. I know it wasn't easy for you, but it did make a difference. Sometimes we need to shake things up to make people see things differently. Encouraged by his words, I started to view my actions in a different light. Revenge, in its many forms, is often seen as a petty or destructive force. But in this case, it had served as a mirror, reflecting the consequences of one's actions back at them. This perspective became a source of strength for me. As we worked through the endless tasks of restoration and dealing with insurance claims, I found a newfound assertiveness. I was no longer hesitant to speak my mind, especially when it came to decisions about our home and family. Linda, for her part, seemed to have taken the lesson to heart. Her interactions with us became more thoughtful, and she was noticeably more restrained on social media. It was a small, yet significant change, one that improved the overall atmosphere whenever we gathered as a family. During this period, I also learned the importance of forgiveness. Holding on to anger and resentment was like carrying a heavy burden, that one that I no longer wished to bear. Forgiving Linda did not mean forgetting what had happened, but it allowed me to move forward without the weight of past conflicts. As our home slowly came back to life, so did our spirits. The process of rebuilding was not just about repairing walls and roofs, but about mending relationships and redefining boundaries. The storm had brought destruction, but in its wake it left room for growth and renewal. The reconstruction of our home progressed steadily, a tangible symbol of our family's resilience. With each repaired wall and repainted room, I felt a sense of accomplishment and hope. This period of rebuilding was not just physical, it was emotional and relational as well. My plan, which had initially been born out of frustration and a desire for revenge, had unexpectedly opened a path to healing and understanding. Linda's transformation, though gradual, was evident. She became more mindful of her words and actions, showing a level of consideration that was previously absent. One weekend, as we were unpacking some boxes in the newly restored living room, Linda dropped by, unannounced yet welcome. She came bearing a homemade cake, a small but significant gesture. We sat around the kitchen table, savoring the cake and the comfort of easy conversation. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," Linda began, her tone reflective. "I realize now how much I've overstepped in the past. I'm sorry for the stress I caused you both." Her apology was sincere, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was the closure I hadn't realized I needed. "Thank you, Linda. I said, meaning every word. It means a lot to us. As we talked, I saw a new side of Linda. She listened more than she spoke, her responses thoughtful and considerate. It was a stark contrast to the Linda I had known, the one who always seemed to be at the center of every conversation. This change in Linda had a ripple effect on our family dynamics. Mark and I found ourselves looking forward to her visits, appreciating her efforts to be a better mother and mother-in-law. Our conversations delved deeper, moving beyond surface-level pleasantries to genuine discussions about life, dreams, and fears. In these moments, I realized the power of communication and empathy. My initial plan, conceived in a moment of frustration, had unknowingly paved the way for a deeper connection. It was a reminder that sometimes the most challenging situations can lead to the most profound transformations. As our home neared completion, so did our journey of reconciliation and understanding. The experience had taught us the value of patience, forgiveness, and the strength of family bonds. We had weathered the storm, both literal and metaphorical, emerging stronger and more united. With our home fully restored and our family relationships on a new, healthier trajectory, I took a moment to reflect on the journey we had undergone. The once damaged walls of our home now stood strong and vibrant, echoing the transformation within our family. Linda's evolution was the most remarkable. The once overbearing and intrusive mother-in-law had become a thoughtful and considerate part of our lives. Her change was not just in her actions, but in her understanding of us as a family. She respected our boundaries and became an integral, positive force in our lives. This transformation was not lost on our extended family and friends. They noticed the change in dynamics, often commenting on the newfound harmony at family gatherings. It was a testament to the power of communication and the willingness to change. As for me, the entire ordeal had been a profound learning experience. I had confronted a challenging situation with a plan that, in retrospect, was risky and could have backfired. But it had led to a positive outcome, teaching me the importance of standing up for what I believed was right, albeit in a non-conventional way. I shared these reflections with Mark one evening as we sat in our rejuvenated living room. I never thought that a plan born out of frustration would lead to such a positive change, I mused. Mark smiled, taking my hand. Sometimes it's the unexpected paths that lead us to the best destinations. I'm just glad we've come out of this stronger as a family. The incident with the tornado and the subsequent fallout with Linda had brought us closer together. It had shown us the strength of our bond, the resilience of our family, and the transformative power of empathy and understanding. Our home, once a symbol of loss and chaos, had become a haven of love and unity. It stood as a reminder that out of destruction can come growth, and out of conflict can come harmony. We had not only rebuilt our home, but had also restructured our family dynamics into something stronger and more meaningful. As I looked around at the walls that had witnessed so much, I felt a deep sense of peace and gratitude. We had weathered the storm, and in its wake, we found a deeper appreciation for each other and the home we shared. Emily, this house, it was always meant to be mine. Sign the divorce papers and leave. Nathan's voice was cold, devoid of the warmth that once drew me to him. I stood in the living room, the walls echoing his harsh words, feeling a mix of disbelief and rising anger. Our marriage, once a sanctuary, had transformed into a battlefield. You can't be serious, I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. This is our home, Nathan, not just yours. He smirked, a gesture so unlike the man I had fallen in love with. Our home? Emily, wake up. You're just a housewife. I've been the one paying for everything. I clenched my fists, feeling a storm brewing inside me. A housewife? Is that all I am to you now? I retorted. Nathan walked closer, his presence overbearing. Exactly. You've done nothing but live off my hard work. It's time you realize your place. I could feel my parents' worried glances from the corner of the room. They had come over for dinner, unaware they'd be witnessing the collapse of my marriage. I didn't want them to see me like this, broken, belittled by the man I once adored. Fine, Nathan, I said, my voice laced with a newfound resolve. I'll sign your papers. But remember this, you will regret it. He laughed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. Regret? Emily, you'll be the one with regrets. I turned away, my parents following silently. As I walked out of that room, out of the life I had built with Nathan, I knew this was not the end. It was a beginning of my fight, my retribution. As I sat in my small but cozy apartment, the memories of my past flooded back, painting a stark contrast to the present. I was the cherished only child of my parents, born after years of their struggling with infertility. Their joy knew no bounds when I came into their lives, a sentiment echoed in every childhood photo, every birthday celebration. "Emily, you were always the center of our world," my mother used to say with a gentle smile. My parents, though not wealthy, spared no effort in providing for me. They encouraged my education, my love for reading, and nurtured my dreams. But with their sacrifice came an unspoken burden, the pressure to find happiness, to make their efforts worthwhile. Meeting Nathan seemed like fulfilling that unspoken promise. He was charming, attentive, and shared a similar background. An only child with aging parents. Our connection was instant, our conversations filled with laughter and shared aspirations. Our wedding was a joyous affair, celebrated with tears and blessings from both families. But the fairy tale started to crumble soon after. Nathan's true colors began to surface once the honeymoon phase faded. His sweet words turned into sharp commands, his once admiring glances now carried a hint of disdain. "You need to be more efficient around the house, Emily. Look at how my mother managed everything despite her job," Nathan would often say, comparing me unfavorably to his mother. His relentless criticism wasn't just confined to household chores. He started controlling our finances, giving me a meager allowance, scoffing whenever I suggested I could return to work. "Work? What for? You can barely manage the house," he'd sneer, his words cutting deeper each time. As I sat there, reminiscing, anger boiled within me. How had I not seen the signs? How had I allowed myself to become this person, a shadow of my former self, living in a loveless, controlling marriage? The realization was bitter, but it sparked a determination within me. "I will not let this be my story," I whispered to myself, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. It was time for Nathan to see the real Emily, the woman who wasn't just a beloved child or a submissive wife. It was time for him to face the consequences of his actions. The days turned into months, and the love that once seemed endless within the walls of our home slowly twisted into a suffocating trap. Each morning began with Nathan's cold demands echoing in the kitchen. "Remember, Emily, dinner needs to be perfect. My colleagues are coming over tonight," Nathan would command, his tone leaving no room for protest. On one such evening, as I meticulously set the table for Nathan's guests, my hands trembled with suppressed anger. The sound of laughter and casual conversation filled the living room, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. "Emily, this steak is slightly overcooked," Nathan commented loudly in front of his colleagues, a smirk playing on his lips. His words, seemingly trivial, were a deliberate jab at my efforts. I forced a smile, replying, "I'll make sure it's better next time." But inside, I was screaming. This wasn't the man I married. This was someone who enjoyed belittling his wife, showcasing his dominance in this skewed power play we called our marriage. The evenings when Nathan's parents visited were even more challenging. They treated our home as their own, never acknowledging my efforts to make them comfortable. Nathan, on the other hand, would spare no expense to please them, often at the cost of our own needs. "Why can't we invite my parents sometimes?" I once dared to ask. Nathan's response was swift and harsh. "Why should I spend my money on your parents? They're not my responsibility." That night, as I lay in bed, I realized the depth of Nathan's selfishness and disregard for me and my family. He had created a world where only his desires mattered, where I was nothing more than a silent participant in his scripted play of domestic bliss. But no more. The fire of rebellion was kindling within me. I was tired of being a mere puppet, tired of the disrespect and emotional torment. It was time for Nathan to see that I wasn't just his obedient wife. I was a woman with a voice, a woman who deserved respect. "I will not be broken," I whispered into the darkness, my resolve strengthening. The seeds of my plan were already taking root. Nathan had underestimated me, and that was his biggest mistake. The day my parents' house was caught in a devastating fire marked the beginning of my rebellion. The house, a symbol of my childhood memories, now stood partially destroyed. My parents, though safe, were shaken and disoriented. This was more than just a building, it was a repository of cherished memories and love. I remember standing amidst the charred remains, my mother's words echoing in my ears. This house held so much of our life, Emily. Letting it go feels like losing a part of ourselves. That night, I lay awake, pondering over my parents' plight and my own stifled existence under Nathan's rule. A plan began to form in my mind. A plan not just to secure my parents' future, but also to free myself from Nathan's tyranny. The next day, I approached Nathan, my voice steady but laced with faux naivety. "Nathan, my parents' house? It's beyond repair. I was thinking of buying them a new one, using my savings." His reaction was predictably self-centered. "Your savings? Well, as long as it's not my money." But there was more to my plan than he knew. The house I was considering for my parents was under renovation, set to be a perfect ruse for my greater scheme. Weeks passed, and the day arrived to help my parents move. Nathan, believing the house to be a simple purchase, had no idea of the trap I was setting. His arrogance was my advantage. As I orchestrated the move, Nathan arrived unexpectedly, declaring ownership of the house and demanding a divorce. It was the moment I had been waiting for. "Fine, Nathan, you shall have your divorce," I said calmly, hiding the triumphant smile that threatened to break through. Little did he know, the house he so arrogantly claimed was not the real deal. The actual property, a modest but comfortable home, was waiting, its location a secret kept from Nathan. As I left with my parents, the look of confusion and defeat on Nathan's face was the first victory in my silent war against him. But it was just the beginning. The real retribution was yet to come. In the days following the move, I worked meticulously, my actions cloaked in secrecy. Nathan, oblivious to my intentions, basked in his perceived victory. It was time to unveil the truth and shatter his delusions. I recall the day vividly. Nathan had called, his voice dripping with condescension. "So, Emily, how does it feel to be back at your parents' old cramped house?" I smiled into the phone, a cold, calculated smile. "Actually, Nathan, we're quite comfortable. You see, the house you claimed was just a temporary arrangement. The real property is elsewhere, safe from your greed." There was a pause, a silence filled with his dawning realization. "What are you saying, Emily? That can't be." "Oh, but it is. And about the divorce papers you so kindly left for me, I've already filed them," I continued, my voice steady and strong. Nathan's reaction was a mix of confusion and anger, a stark contrast to his usual arrogant demeanor. "This isn't over, Emily. You can't just—" But I cut him off, no longer willing to endure his tirades. "It is over, Nathan, and let me remind you, I'm not just the meek housewife you thought you married. I am a lawyer, well versed in the law. Your attempts to intimidate me are futile." His silence on the other end was the sweetest revenge, a validation of my newfound empowerment. The years of belittlement and control were coming to an end, and I was the orchestrator of his downfall. As I hung up the phone, a sense of liberation washed over me. I had turned the tables on Nathan, using his arrogance against him. It was a victory, not just for me, but for every moment I had felt insignificant in his shadow. The path ahead was clear. I would rebuild my life, free from Nathan's oppression, and stand tall, a woman reborn from the ashes of a marriage that had sought to diminish her. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than expected. My phone buzzed, and Nathan's name flashed on the screen. Bracing myself, I answered, my heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and resolve. "Emily, this is madness. You can't do this to me." Nathan's voice was frantic, a stark contrast to his usual composed and condescending tone. "Oh, but I can, and I have, Nathan," I replied, my voice calm and unwavering. "You thought you could walk over me, take what's mine, and discard me like I was nothing. You were wrong." He was silent for a moment, and I could almost hear the cogs turning in his mind as he tried to comprehend the gravity of his situation. "Emily, listen, we can work this out. Let's forget about the divorce and start over," he pleaded, his voice laced with false sweetness. The suggestion was laughable. "Start over? After everything you've done? No, Nathan. I deserve better, and so do my parents." I could feel his desperation through the phone. "But the house, my reputation, my career, you're ruining everything." "That's the consequence of your actions, Nathan. You chose this path when you underestimated me, when you treated me and my family with such disregard," I said firmly. The call ended with Nathan's pleas fading into a defeated silence. It was a victory, not just legally but morally and emotionally. I had stood up to the bully who had made my life miserable, and I had won. In the following weeks, Nathan's life unraveled. His attempts to control and manipulate had backfired, leaving him to face the harsh reality of his actions. His once flourishing career took a hit as the details of our divorce and his behavior became the talk of the town. As for me, I found solace in my parents' company, in the small yet comfortable home that was truly ours. I had reclaimed my life, emerging stronger and more determined. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to travel, free from the shadows of a loveless marriage. Sitting in the sunlit living room of the modest house that was now a sanctuary for my parents and me, I reflected on the tumultuous journey I had endured. The walls, freshly painted, seemed to symbolize a new beginning, a stark contrast to the oppressive walls of the house I once shared with Nathan. It had been several weeks since the divorce was finalized, and with each passing day, the weight of my past life lifted, replaced by a sense of peace and self-assuredness. Nathan's attempts to reach out had ceased, his once looming presence now just a distant memory. My parents, who had witnessed my transformation, were my pillars of strength. "We always knew you had this strength in you, Emily," my father said one evening, his eyes brimming with pride. I had returned to work, immersing myself in the world of law, a world where I was respected and valued for my intellect and skills. The stark contrast to my life with Nathan was both liberating and empowering, but it wasn't just about reclaiming my professional identity. It was about rediscovering who I was beyond the roles of daughter, wife, or victim. I was Emily, a woman of resilience and determination. One day as I sat in a cafe, lost in thought, a familiar face approached me. It was John, an old friend and colleague. "Emily, it's been a while. You look different, happier." His words made me realize how far I had come. "I am happier, John. I've come to understand that sometimes letting go is the first step to finding yourself." Our conversation flowed effortlessly, and as he left, he said, "Let's not wait another lifetime to catch up again, Emily." As I walked back home, I felt a glimmer of something new, a possibility of a future that was mine to shape. Maybe, just maybe, there was room for new beginnings, for new love. But this time on my terms. The journey had been long and arduous, but as I stood in my parents' garden watching the sunset, I realized that every challenge had led me to this moment of tranquility and self-discovery. The shadows of my past had finally lifted, giving way to the warm, hopeful light of a new dawn.